Chapter 36. 5 chapters further in all my stories here. Patreon.com/Niflheim. Chapter 36. Theon Greyjoy. Smoldering ruins stretch across the land, with broken beams and scorched thatch scattered in every direction. The air carries the acrid scent of ash and despair, mingling with faint cries and an eerie, oppressive silence. Stripped of livestock, crops, and hope, the place feels like a ghostly remnant of life, abandoned to the ravages of time and cruelty. A man dragged a comely woman through her hair. "Found a pretty one," he laughs. "I'd let ya have a pass after I'm done, my lord." Theon simply stared blankly at the man's eyes, taking no heed of his words. The man awkwardly stills for a moment, before hesitantly skulking away. Theon felt a slight sense of disgust at their actions. This was the 5th village they raided since their arrival in Fair Isle, and his experience with the Northern Army had him used to other standards of warfare. Fair Isle is an island in the Sunset Sea, separated from the rest of the Westerlands by the Straits of Fair Isle. The island is controlled by House Farman, whose seat Faircastle sits on it. It is also an island of great strategic value. If the Ironborn managed to hold the isle and its castle, creatively dubbed as Faircastle, they'd have a reliable stronghold capable of holding their longships and men close to the mainland. Its quality as an island makes it more advantageous than other targets like the Banefort or the Crag, as his father's reavers are terribly unused to fighting battles at land. An island is familiar territory, as it allows them to intercept any attacking army at sea. The issue is that these weren't new concepts. The rivalry between the Westerlands and the Iron Islands is the oldest example of cultural enmity in Westeros. The two kingdoms spilled each other's blood dating all the way back to the days of the Castleys and the Grey King. This meant that the nature of their conflict has been deeply explored throughout the generations. Most strategies, tactics, tricks and schemes have been used once before. When the Ironborn held the element of surprise, they tended to win. Until the other kingdoms would interfere, or the Westerlands would simply strike back and chase them away. Conversely, when the Ironborn's attacks are predicted, they tend to usually lose pretty handily, provided the Westerlands were at full strength. In terms of advantage, this particular iteration of the conflict is somewhat balanced. The Ironborn do not have the element of surprise, yet the Westerlands' forces are depleted. More than 2/3 had marched with Tywin to the Riverlands, whilst the rest got decimated by Robb's ambush at Oxcross. To that end, by order from his father, the Iron Fleet was separated into 3. The majority of the ships would fall under his uncle Victarion's hold, besieging Lannisport with goal of taking the city. The rest would be split in twain, one half under their respective captains, would scatter as they wish across the western shore and raid as they wish, sowing chaos and fear to their utmost. The last batch, falling under his sister's command, were ordered to take Fair Isle. Theon and his sea bitch would command 8 longships of his sister's 20. His father would prove his disdain for him when he shackles him with a man he knows well, Dagmar Cleftjaw and his ship, Foamdrinker. Dagmar was the man who taught him how to sail, swing a sword, and ride a horse. He'd saw him as a child more than he did his mother and father combined. And as he saw his hideously scarred mouth smile toward him, Theon couldn't help but reminisce about days when that same ugly mug would so the same, praising him for a job well done. And as things tend to be lately, those feelings died as soon as they surfaced. "Uncle." Theon's sleepy gaze greeted the older man. "How many villages left?" While Asha blockaded the island's port, stewing on her ship thinking of a way to capture the castle, Theon used his experience at Robb's side to good use. Robb had used Brynden Tully and his riders extensively during their ride toward Riverrun. The Blackfish was the preeminent authority on scouting and guerrilla warfare, as it is his usage of these strategies against the Golden Company during the War of the Ninnepenny Kings that brought his name such notoriety. With his expertise, enemy scouts and spies were located days before they could glimpse their horses and either evaded, captured, or killed, allowing for them to reach Riverrun undetected and lay a trap for the Kingslayer. The same tactic as in keeping the enemy's knowledge of one's whereabouts secret was Robb's mainstay during what few battles they had, from the Battle of the Whispering Woods to the massacre at Oxcross, so Theon sought to do the same. The issue was that he had no Brynden Tully at his side, no element of surprise, nor skilled outriders that could run circles around the enemy scouts. But the Farmans also suffered from a lack of skilled subordinates, most of their veteran soldiers either with the Old Lion or Lannisport, leaving them with a barebones garrison. Not only that, but the Lord of the Faircastle didn't think to evacuate most villages, only those close to his fortress. Using them as both an enticing target for his disobeying men and a reasonable motive for whoever holed up in the cast, So as not to spook them, he and his rebellious rabble went from village to another, raiding their way across the Isle, moving in such a way that targeted the settlements closest to Faircastle first, leaving it more and more isolated. Not many. Dagmar's voice was gentler than one would expect, carrying with it a jovial touch. Some to the western shore, but they're small and scattered. What do you think should be our next step? A frown made its way to Theon's face. The way was spoken with a guiding tone, as if Dagmar was truly the one in charge and simply asking for Theon's view. We'll split in two, he orders, and move discreetly through the trees. We shall meet some miles off Faircastle. With their men holed up inside, it should be easy to stay out of sight. Do you have some way to discreetly contact Asha? I can come up with something. Now that they have taken the element of surprise back, it's time for the Ironborn to do what they do best. Be annoying little shits. Asterisk. Theon's breath came in measured, deliberate intervals as he crouched behind the shadowed rocks near Faircastle's western gate. The pale glow of the moon bathed the castle's walls in an eerie, silver light, and the sound of the crashing waves below blended with the faint clink of Ironborn steel. His bow felt firm in his hands, an extension of himself honed through years of practice. As always, he stayed at the rear, observing his men with detached calm. Hold, Theon whispered, his voice low and steady, carrying enough weight to quiet the eager shuffle of boots behind him. Patience was a quality the old him found distasteful, too eager for glory and an infantile desire to prove himself. Not that the new him was better, he just couldn't push himself to care. The attack had been planned quite well. Dagmar's party scaled the walls from the eastern side, slipping over the battlements like shadows, while Asha led her larger force in a bold assault on the heavily fortified port. It was a feint to draw the defenders to the docks, leaving the western gate vulnerable. Theon's role was to strike the balance, to exploit the moment of weakness and flank the distracted guards. He just hoped Dagmar is able to inform Asha without being detected, and even a clever plan rarely survived the chaos of battle. The soft whistle of a bird call, Dagmar's signal, pierced the night. Theon raised his hand, signaling his men to advance. They moved silently, boots crunching on loose gravel as they approached the gate. But the defenders were alert. Arrows rained down from the battlements, and the clash of steel soon echoed across the courtyard. Theon loosed an arrow, the string of his bow thrumming against his fingertips. His shot struck true, taking an archer on the wall square in the throat. He reached for another arrow, knocking and loosing it in one fluid motion. As he picked his targets, one of his men foolishly got his throat impaled by an enemy arrow, distastefully dirtying Theon with his blood. But Theon didn't care for scum. Press on, he shouted, his voice carrying over the din. The Ironborn surged forward, battering the gate's defenders with their axes and shields. The fight was harder than expected, and Theon felt the familiar weight of doubt creeping into his thoughts. But after a grueling push, the gate fell. The Ironborn spilled into the castle's narrow corridors, their shouts mingling with the cries of dying men. Theon moved cautiously, his eyes scanning every shadow for hidden threats. By the time they reached the port, Asha's forces were locked in brutal combat. The defenders had rallied there, forming a stubborn line that held firm against the Ironborn advance. He could see her at the front. It is strange to see his sister fight as a man should, but she seemed to do well enough. She took advantage of her lithe form quite well, taking advantage of enemy openings and only striking when sure of her success. At least she kept herself from getting too close to those enemy pikes. Theon and his men emerged from the castle's inner passages, their sudden arrival throwing the defenders into disarray. With a fierce cry, the Ironborn drove into the enemy's exposed flank, their axes swinging mercilessly. Asha's mocking laughter cut through the chaos. "About time, little brother," she shouted, her voice sharp and sardonic. By the time the battle had ended, Theon had run out of arrows and had to fight with his axe. But Faircastle was theirs, the castle soon finding itself ravaged by the berserk reavers. Fires burned in the courtyard, the light flickering over the faces of men and women as they drank, plundered, and made their triumph known. Asterisk. Theon lingered on the edge of the celebration, his face unreadable. He watched as his people reveled in their cruelty, their laughter mingling with the cries of the vanquished. His stomach churned. It wasn't the violence itself that unsettled him. He had grown up among the Ironborn, after all, but the sheer emptiness of it. He couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong. Winterfell rose unbidden in his mind's eye. He saw Ned Stark, his stern face etched with quiet strength, and heard his measured words. The lessons of honor and restraint, things Theon had scoffed at in his youth, resurfaced now with uncomfortable clarity. Had he absorbed more of Ned's teachings than he had realized? He felt a pang of guilt at the thought. Unable to stomach the revelry, Theon slipped away, climbing the stone steps to the top of the castle walls. He sat with his legs dangling over the edge, his bow resting across his lap. The sea stretched endlessly before him, the dark waves shimmering under the faint light of the stars. The first rays of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The sight took him back to the moment he had nearly drowned. He remembered the icy grip of the water, the panic giving way to a strange, serene surrender as he lost the fight against his uncle's grip. Looking at the sunrise now, he felt a similar peace. The sea and sky seemed to blur together, their vastness offering a fleeting comfort. For the first time since the drowning, Theon felt a faint smile tug at his lips. It was a small, bittersweet thing, barely there. The sunrise marked the end of the night and the beginning of something new. What that something might be, he couldn't say. 28 comments 0 vote. Chapter 37, 5 chapters further in all my stories here. Patreon.com/Niflheim. Chapter 37, A.N. This is a small chapter meant to explain the actions of Wyman Manderly and his role on the coming plot. I may or may not explore his story further. Wyman Manderly. Wyman Manderly had always been a man of imposing stature, his girth as much a hallmark of his presence as his hearty laugh or quick wit. His rotund frame, wrapped in fine velvets and furs, was crowned with a face flushed with good cheer and framed by a neatly trimmed beard streaked with white. Yet his bright, shrewd eyes betrayed the sharp mind behind the jovial exterior. The crowd at Gulltown buzzed with excitement as Wyman observed the small tourney organized by Lord Gerald Grafton. The event, meant to celebrate his arrival, was a spirited display of martial skill and local pride. Knights from nearby lands clashed in the melee while the stands roared approval. Wyman clapped heartily as a young knight unseated another with a well-timed lance thrust. He was fond of such spectacles, it is a wonder why his peers in the north find them distasteful. Beside him, Sir Osgood Shet leaned in, his voice eager and unctuous. A fine display, don't you agree, Lord Manderly? Our knights are of the old blood, descendants of the first men who once ruled these lands. My house Shet, in particular, held dominion here as kings in days of old. Indeed, most impressive, Wyman replied, his tone rich with joviality. He raised his goblet in toast to the knight's victory. Your heritage is a source of great pride, Sir Shet. But inwardly, Wyman scoffed at Osgood's boasts. Kings of old, he thought. You are barely a shadow of those rulers, not even third in Gulltown's hierarchy. Laying in your hovel of a tower, clinging to the good old days, as if they weren't hundreds of years ago. As the tournament continued, Wyman turned his thoughts to the true purpose of his visit. Officially, he had come to negotiate trade partnerships with Gulltown, to secure foodstuffs, weapons, and armor for gold plundered from the Lannisters. But his lord, Robb Stark, had given him another task. Robb suspected Petter Baelish, master of coin, of treachery and embezzlement, using his connections in Gulltown to hide his misdeeds. It wasn't an issue. Robb Stark had no relation with the Baratheon crown or their holdings, and any crimes and/or misdeeds the man may have committed to those two has no relevance when it comes to the current conflict. But Baelish is an enemy, someone who betrayed Ned Stark and holds motive to act against the Starks. Not only that, but his relationship with Lisa Arryn might suggest that he has a part in her reticence when it comes to joining the war. Wyman's role was to uncover the truth and sever Baelish's support within the city, and from there, cut any leverage has over anyone that isn't a former Tully within the Vale. The meeting with Gerald Grafton began in a lavishly adorned hall, its walls lined with tapestries depicting Gulltown's naval history. Gerald lounged at the head of the table, a goblet in hand, his ruddy complexion betraying an evening of indulgence. Wyman adopted an air of joviality, clapping his hands together as he approached. Lord Grafton, Wyman boomed. I must say, your hospitality rivals the feasts of White Harbor. This wine is as fine as any I've tasted. Gerald chuckled, gesturing for Wyman to sit. It's imported from the Arbor, no less. Only the best for my esteemed guests. As they exchanged pleasantries, Gerald's tone shifted. So, Lord Manderly, tell me, what brings the Lord of White Harbor to my city? Surely not just to sample my wine. Wyman took a generous bite of venison, its fat spilling onto his garments. Trade, my lord. As you well know, my lord has secured significant riches during his jaunt in the Westerlands and wishes to put them to good use. The Riverlands are too ravaged, the north too depleted, and others ruled by enemies, and so Gulltown is our recourse for that matter. Gerald's eyes gleamed. You've come to the right place. Gulltown has resources aplenty, though, of course, quality comes at a cost. Conversely, his meeting with Robb Stark took place in a modest chamber, sparsely decorated save for a few heirlooms of House Stark. Robb, a man in his 50s with streaks of grey in his hair, greeted Wyman with a respectful nod. Lord Manderly, Robb said. Your reputation precedes you. The North's loyalty to its allies is well known. And House Stark's wisdom is equally renowned, Wyman replied, his tone respectful. He took the offered seat and immediately steered the conversation to trade. I understand that Gulltown has endured some challenges of late. Yet your name still carries great weight in these parts. Robb sighed, his expression weary. Weight, perhaps, but not power. The docks have become a mire of corruption. Merchants favored by certain interests have driven up tolls, leaving my associates disadvantaged. It's difficult to compete when the rules are bent against you. An unacceptable state of affairs, Wyman said, his voice heavy with feigned outrage. Perhaps a partnership could ease your burdens. White Harbor would be honored to strengthen its ties with the Arryns of Gulltown. Back in Gerald's hall, the conversation turned to specifics. Lord Stark has bidden me to purchase large quantities of silver and steel. He predicts that the gold at his hand may prove to be useless soon should the Lannisters wish to dilute its value. Even that sentence seemed to tire Wyman, his breaths came labored and heavy, and he quenched his thirst by gulping down another cup of Arbor gold. I'd consider 13 pounds of silver or 41 pounds of steel for every pound of gold a reasonable exchange rate. Gerald's eyes lit up with greed, as he poorly hid his disdain for the Manderly Lord. I'm afraid that may be too steep for me. I have another buyer who offers me a better exchange rates. They are a loyal customer, you must understand. His smile is entirely too slimy. It would be a betrayal to offer another person better prices, no matter their station. Wyman's jovial mask slipped for a moment. That is disappointing, he says. I am afraid that I cannot decide on a lower exchange rate without Lord Robb's permission. He says regretfully, before allowing his expression to shift into one of realization. Perhaps you'd be willing to arrange a meeting with your buyer. Perhaps we can come to an understanding. I believe I might convince my lord to purchase his share. Gerald hesitated, swirling his wine. Their identity is not something I'm at liberty to disclose. But I can assure you, Lord Manderly, that their business is entirely legitimate. Wyman leaned back, his expression unreadable. Legitimate, indeed, he thought. In Robb's chamber, the conversation flowed more freely. Robb explained how Baelish's departure had disrupted Gulltown's balance of power. Without him, Lord Grafton has taken liberties. He's imposed tolls that favor his allies and cripple others. Wyman's eyes narrowed. And yet, Lord Arryn, Gulltown's wealth seems unaffected. How does Lord Grafton justify such policies? He doesn't, Robb replied bitterly. He flaunts it as proof of his governance. But the truth is clear to anyone who looks closely. The gold flows to his coffers, while the city's foundations crumble. In Gerald's hall, Wyman's patience began to wear thin. As Gerald boasted about his city's prosperity, Wyman interjected with a question meant to unsettle him. Tell me, Lord Grafton, I hear Gulltown's incomes increased tenfold in 3 years. It's a remarkable achievement. Gerald's smile faltered for a moment before he regained his composure. I owe that achievement to my friend Petter's acumen. He says, that man can practically conjure money from nothing. Was it now? Wyman's tone was light, but his eyes were sharp. I guess one must truly be ingenious to climb to such a position as master of coin. And in such a short time, to boot. Gerald let out a shaky laugh. It is fortunate that I am blessed with good friends. Wyman raises his glass. To new friendships. To new friendships. Back in Robb's chamber, the conversation took another turn. Robb's expression darkened. I must thank you, my lord. He says. Were it not for your deal, I would no longer be able to find any profitable deals. The increased tolls and tariffs have made my endeavors too costly. Whoever is targeting us not only seems to hold power everywhere, but they seem to have enough capital to undercut prices even in markets they don't control. I was at my last straw. And who, then, would control Gulltown's trade? Wyman pressed. Gerald, of course, Rabar admitted. Or whoever he serves. Asterisk. As the tournament's final tilt concluded, Wyman's thoughts were heavy with revelation. Gerald's evasiveness and Rabar's candor painted a clear picture. Gulltown's prosperity was a facade, propped up by Baelish's manipulations and Gerald's greed. A roar from the crowd drew Wyman's attention. Esser Arind Grafton Haddon Horst Esser Rolf, and Wyman's grin widened as Osgood Shet reluctantly handed him a pouch of coins. 10 gold dragons, as agreed, Osgood muttered. Wyman weighed the pouch and frowned. It felt too light. Opening it, he confirmed there were indeed 10 gold dragons inside. But as he examined the coins, a realization struck him. They were thinner than they should be, their weight subtly diminished. Tell me, Esser Shet, Wyman asked casually, does Gulltown have a mint? Osgood looked puzzled but answered, why, yes, we do. Wyman's mind raced. Baelish has been melting gold dragons, diluting them to pocket the difference. That's how he's inflated Gulltown's incomes and maintained his wealth. The same could be done with the Crown's treasury. Thinking of Roberts Baratheon's steep debt, Wyman couldn't help but gasp. He could be hiding millions in gold dragons. He thinks. The question is, where? 19 comments 0 vote. Chapter 38. 5 chapters further in all my stories here. Patreon.com/Niflheim. Chapter 38. Roose Bolton. The gray sky mirrored the cold temperament of Roose Bolton as he rode through the gates of the twins. His banner fluttered in the wind, a flayed man, red and raw against the pale pink. As his small retinue dismounted, the Freys stared down from the battlements, their expressions ranging from amused disdain to open suspicion. Roose stood by the gate until someone brought bread and salt. Inside, the hall of the twins was as dour as its lord. Walder Frey, shrunken with age but still vibrant in spite, awaited them atop his dais, surrounded by his endless progeny. Frey's eyes, sharp and calculating, flitted to Bolton like a hawk spotting prey. Lord Bolton, Frey rasped, his voice carrying through the hall. You honor us with your presence. His tone dripped sarcasm, his thin lips curling into a smirk. As much honor as your lord deigns to bear, anyhow. Roose stepped forward, unperturbed, his face as blank as freshly fallen snow. Lord Frey, I come to fulfill my promise to unite our houses by blood, as you and my lord agreed. Walder snorted. Promises from the north have always been fickle. He ekes passage through my bridge with close to no payment, and he lets that old fish murder my son and grandsons, not even allowing them to take the black, nor sending their bones to their home to be buried. Spittle falls off his mouth. Your lord has much to promise, Lord Bolton. But blood, you say? Oh, Bolton, you must mean marriage. His laughter filled the hall, sharp and shrill. He gestured grandly toward his daughters and granddaughters, who lined the walls like goods on display. Take your pick, my lord. They're yours, with dowries enough to weigh them in silver. The women flinched under Roose's unblinking gaze, their nervous eyes darting away from his pale, calculating stare. Bolton hummed low in his throat, stepping closer, inspecting each woman like a butcher assessing livestock. His gaze lingered on the largest of the group, and his lips twitched, a facsimile of a smile that froze the air in the room. She was a short thing, a large girl with watery blue eyes, 3 chins, a huge bosom, and blonde hair. She fearfully curtsies. My lord, her voice fluttering as squeaky. Her cheeks burned with shame and fear as Walder Frey burst into raucous laughter. Ah, Merritt's brood, Valda, a fine choice, Lord Bolton. The source of his amusement was clear. The late lord promised the bride's weight in silver, so Roose chose the fattest one. Roose's attempt at a smile grew, his pale eyes gleaming with something unreadable. She will suffice, he said, his tone even, but something in it made Walder's grin falter. The hall grew quiet as Bolton turned to the Frey patriarch. A private meeting would be best, Lord Walder. Roose murmured, his tone soft as silk but heavy with suggestion. Walder Frey hesitated for a moment, his amusement tempered by the unnerving presence of the man before him. "I," he finally rasped. "Come, let us talk blood and promises behind closed doors." As the Freys whispered among themselves, Bolton followed Walder to the solar. The laughter and jeers of the hall faded, leaving only the echo of boots against the stone, a prelude to whispers of alliances and betrayals. Asterisk. Roose took a slight sip from his offered cup. Walder's current wife, some unfortunate young woman from House Arrenford, also fills Walder's cup before leaving. Once he does though, he puts the cup away. He wasn't one for wine, and this one wasn't watered down enough for him to pretend. From his inner pocket, he pulls out the 2 letters. Walder smacks his weathered lips after gulping down his own. What is this? He glances at the letters, noticing their sigils. Love letters from our overlords. The irony didn't escape his mind. Not far off, actually. Bolton stays silent, letting Walder parse through the messages. What is this? Walder exclaims. He turns to Bolton with bulging eyes. You're an inspector. With your permission, of course. Ruse, Bolton answers, completely nonplussed. Walder scoffs. Oh, so if I say no, it will be over. People won't moan and bitch about how the late Lord Walder keeps traitors into his household. He glares at Ruse. Cease your prattle, boy. I know an ultimatum when I see one. Ruse's gaze hardened, as he leaned forward menacingly. You wish for honesty? Very well, he says. The truth is that both Edmure and Hoster Tully are dead, leaving Robb Stark and his siblings next in line through their mother. Not only that, but Edmure Tully died because of a scheme facilitated by Aemon Frey and his sons, your son and grandson, sending the Red on a berserk rage. The only reason your house wasn't attainted and your bloodline put to the sword is that Robb Stark is on his way to Harrenhal to get crowned. It is luck. Walder purses his lips, but Bolton doesn't let on. It is luck that my lord has developed a fondness for your eldest, and has a wish to secure his succession, and in turn, your house's resources for his forces. It is luck that Brynden Tully doesn't march to your door and split your head from rage. It is luck that there is a war at hand, and so no resources could be diverted to houses that express rebellion. He explains. It seems that there is a misunderstanding. Those, he gestures toward the letters, are not an ultimatum, they are an easy way out. All you need to do is simply accord me the authority to investigate your house. My lord was frank on his letter. None of your riches, lands nor authority are to be affected in any way. Walder purses his lips, his face heating up from anger. None of the other houses would agree to this. He bites out. The matters of a noble household is up to members of the bloodline. This is a breach of tradition. Ruse thought the old man to have enough low cunning to be able to realize his predicament. His reaction was frankly disappointing. It is why my task is to be done only with your permission. Robb Stark was much too canny to alienate the other nobles. In fact, the Frys were hated enough for this to be considered more than fair by their part. And not to reiterate, your son was in part responsible for the heir of the Riverland's death. This no longer simply concerns your household. Walder grunts once again, and Ruse could see the thoughts storm through his brain as the offense started to fade. After what seemed like an eternity, Walder finally lowers his head. So be it, he exclaims. But you cannot be seen amongst my family as the one dealing out the punishments. I will choose who is to be punished, and how they are punished. Ah, I might have underestimated how shameless and scheming this man is. Bolton realizes that his earlier defiance went much deeper. If the lord of the castle allowed any man run roughshod through his house, punishing any member he deemed offensive, then some of the family members might in concern think that he became too alienating to the ruling houses, and that someone else, Stevrin Frey perhaps, might be a more friendly face to take control of their house. What a chaotic family, Ruse thinks. A Bolton would never allow things to devolve to this extent. He chooses to tilt his head instead of shrug. If the lord of the house is willing to do my work for me, then so be it. Walder grunts once again, and Ruse thinks he may have overstepped his welcome. I shall head to my quarters then. I should expect a moderate marriage ceremony in the way of the old gods on the morrow. He stands. After which I suggest you keep to your castle. Sir Stevrin has been an excellent representative to the House of Frey. Asterisk. The next day, there was a simple ceremony of marriage that went fairly quickly. Festivities were kept to a minimum, and his wife, unflattering that she was obedient and seemed content to listen to her betters. Apparently, during the consummation, Lord Walder held a private trial whereupon he punished a great number of his progeny, most of them his sons or grandsons who were vocal or ambitious enough to plot for his seat after his demise. Most were disinherited and exiled, and were sent back to their mother's lands as things tended to go. Some, like Walder Rivers, were too problematic and were thus forced to swear the black. He honestly thought it was a long time coming. Such large houses need to have a clear structure of inheritance or have their family name tarnished by infighting. The family name must always come first, after all. The day after that, Ruse left on a carriage to head back to Harrenhal, his heart not nearly content but almost relieved by the quick nature of this debacle. Roose admits he was a bit forceful, but he had to make sure to assert the urgency and the importance of this task, or else that old coot would think of some meandering scheme to drag him into, or worse, attempt to convince him to join. The Starks were up, and the Lannisters are losing ground as we speak. Robb Stark was also smart enough to suspect any wrongdoing, and would not let himself get blindsided so easily, or at least, that was Roose's read on the man. Bolton's knew how to be patient. Rebellion cannot be born from naught, and doing so against a popular and successful overlord is the height of folly. No, what he needs to do is to wait, keep his wits on and be as useful and unthreatening as possible, and wait for the perfect opportunity to drive a knife through the Stark's chest. If that opportunity doesn't come during his life, then so be it, his heir will keep on and take his blade. Boltons keep their blades sharp, after all. 16 comments 0 vote. Chapter 39. 5 chapters further in all my stories here. Patreon.com/Niflheim. Chapter 39. For those uninformed, I wrote this chapter over a month ago. It was experiment to see if my patrons would enjoy AI-edited chapters. They didn't. Sorry if you find the phrasing awkward. I am planning to re-edit this soon. And no more AI editing. Sandor Clegane. Sandor Clegane rose from the half-barrel tub, water sloshing over its rough wooden sides and pooling in dark puddles on the stone floor. The warm steam hovered in the lantern-lit gloom, distorting shapes into dancing shadows. He glanced down at the water, almost expecting to glimpse something new in his reflection. Instead, he saw only that scarred face he had despised for so long, its surface as warped as the ripples. He curled his lip, the steam condensed on his burned flesh, mingling with the sweat that always gleamed there. Sandor's mind wandered through the path of his life, all the missteps and grudges that had led him to this moment. He spat on the stone and thought, what is it all worth now? Nothing. Long ago, his single driving desire had been to kill Gregor Clegane, the brother who had given him these scars. Gregor had stolen Sandor's childhood in a burst of flame and pain. Every savage day spent in his shadow had left Sandor seething for revenge. So he'd sold his sword to the Crown Prince Joffrey, later king, because being a valued dog at court kept him in a position where the Lannisters could not discard him easily. If Gregor so much as set foot in King's Landing, Sandor would be there, ready to bury steel in his gut. Or so he'd planned. But Gregor Clegane, the Mountain, had died on some distant battlefield at the hands of a Northman. Rumor said it was a gruesome fight, that the Mountain had lingered in agony, brought low by a warrior from Winterfell's cause. That was what rankled most. Gregor had been his kill to claim. Now that reason for living, that ambition which had propelled him through every battle and slight, was gone. Sandor bared his teeth at his reflection, then dipped his fingers in the lukewarm water to wipe the grime from his cheeks. He snarled, voice low and bitter. The one thing I wanted taken from me. By some damned northerner. He pulled himself upright and reached for the threadbare towel, rubbing it over his broad shoulders and chest in short, angry motions. You're a dog dancing for scraps from a king's table, he thought. And for what? Gregor's gone, and I didn't even get the satisfaction of watching him die. Piece by piece, he donned his armor. Greaves strapped onto his calves, then the cuisses for his thighs. The thick leather underlay squeaked as he fastened each buckle. Next came the mail shirt, heavy and ringing as it settled around his torso. The battered steel plates for his arms and shoulders followed, and finally he hefted his sword belt. The routine was as familiar as drawing breath. He'd worn armor more years than he cared to count. He wanted to let out a laugh at the absurdity of it all. A sworn shield to a spoiled whelp he detested, standing guard in a rotting city about to be besieged by Stannis Baratheon, while the only real reason he'd ever worn this armor died in some far-off skirmish. Should ride away now, he told himself. Better than waiting here to guard a brat king who'd piss himself if I looked at him cross. He adjusted his gauntlets, testing his grip, when the door burst open. A maidservant stumbled through, nearly toppling over as she gaped at him. "Sir," she managed, though Sandor was no true knight. "Stannis's fleet has been sighted. They say it's more ships than we have by far. The bells, they'll be rung soon." Sandor snorted and jerked his chin at her. "Get out," he said, his voice a low growl. "I heard enough." She nodded, face pale, and backed out hastily, slamming the door behind her. Once alone, Sandor let out a breath. So it starts. Good. Let them come. Perhaps the city will burn. He scooped up his sword and left the chamber, forging a path through the corridors. Servants hurried past, all wide-eyed with fear. He saw hollow cheeks and trembling hands, hungry folk forced to work in a castle that might be doomed. This place stinks of fear. Only question is whether it's worse inside or out. He cut through a courtyard thronged with men mustering around the mud gate. Ribbons of sunlight, already edging toward late afternoon, fell upon helms and spears. The smell of stale sweat and unwashed bodies mingled with the tang of pitch from the catapults. Tyrion Lannister stood near the gate, struggling with a strap on his mismatched armor. The dwarf glanced up and greeted Sandor with a fleeting smirk. "You're late," he said, tapping a small spiked helm under his arm. "We've important business, you know." Sandor shrugged. "You can fight them yourself for all I care, imp. Where's your sellsword bodyguard, that brawn?" Tyrion's lips twitched in wry amusement. "Preoccupied," he replied, tone dry. "I've heard conflicting reports. Either he's securing one of the keys against infiltration, or he's extorting old Mistress Tanda for more coin. Possibly both at once, knowing him." "Then you're left with me," Sandor said without humor. "So it seems." Tyrion gestured to a nearby cluster of gold cloaks, hedge knights, and sellswords. "I'm putting you in charge of these. If they run, cut a few down. That ought to scare the rest into staying. Remember, there's one important head in all this that must remain firmly attached, King Joffrey's." Sandor gave Tyrion a dark look. "I know my duty." He spat in the dirt. For all the good it does, he thought. He'll probably get himself killed from sheer stupidity. No sooner had he voiced that thought in his mind than Joffrey strutted up with his retinue. The boy king was clad in golden mail that shone too brightly, more decorative than practical. Meryn Trant wore his Kingsguard whites, though smudges and stains showed he'd done some fighting or at least scuffling. Trant's eyes narrowed when he caught sight of Sandor. Sandor stared back, recalling how the so-called knight beat girls at Joffrey's whim. Gregor never pretended to be good, Sandor thought with disgust. This one pretends at honor while doing worse. Pathetic. Joffrey gave an imperious tilt of his chin toward Sandor. "Hound," he said, "you'll keep these men from running, yes? If they try to desert, make an example." He sniffed as though the notion pleased him. "Aye, your grace," Sandor replied, though the words tasted bitter. "If only I could see you skewered instead, you worthless little beast." Joffrey, satisfied, turned away, exchanging words with Meryn Trant. Sandor set about forming the men, surveying them with a practiced eye. They lined up in ragged columns, though discipline was clearly lacking. He mentally counted off their meager strengths. 1,000 men from Stokeworth and Rosby, those seemed halfway decent. Their arms were uniform, and they marched in unison. The rest were a sorry melange. 5,000 or more gold cloaks, many malnourished and undisciplined, plus 150 hill tribesmen who took orders only when it suited them. 300 hedge knights, arrogant and overconfident, all dreaming they were hero material. And 800 sellswords who might betray them if the winds of war changed direction. "They'd sooner cut my throat than follow me if it got them a bag of coins from Stannis," he thought. Better keep a close watch on them. He turned his mind to the overall defense of King's Landing. Their fleet, a paltry 50-some ships, minus those that had conveniently vanished after their last resupply run. Tyrion suspected bribes from Stannis. Against them, Stannis boasted 200 warships or more, many crewed by hardened veterans from the Ironborn Rebellion. Then there was Stannis's main host, perhaps 15,000 cavalry and close to 5,000 infantry, seasoned men from Dragonstone and the Stormlands. Worse, King's Landing had precious little food left, and the small folk were a breath away from riot. The only real advantage the Lannisters had was the city's walls and gates, plus the catapults, scorpions, ballistae, and a monstrous chain across the river, all of it tied to Tyrion's scheme with wildfire. The horns on the ramparts sounded then, a deep, mournful note that made Sandor's stallion paw at the ground in agitation. From the parapet, he could see black sails gliding into view on the waters of the Blackwater. The sun hung low, painting the horizon in red and gold. Stannis's fleet unfurled in precise lines, 10 columns, each with about 20 ships. The first 3 columns showed war galleys from the Royal Navy that had defected, or from lords sworn to Stannis. Behind them were smaller Myrish vessels carrying troops to be landed. And after those came the supply ships, cogs and lumbering carracks no doubt filled with foot soldiers, horses, and siege equipment. Sandor eyed the newly built watchtowers at the river's mouth and saw the faint glint of the chain in the water. So that's the trick the imps pinned our hopes on, he thought. If they come in too far, they won't get back out. From the city, the first volley soared overhead, pots of pitch trailing smoke, stones from the trebuchets and catapults. A few crashed short, sending up jets of water. One cask smashed into the deck of a galley, smearing black pitch across planks and men alike. Moments later, fire arrows rained down, igniting small patches of flame. Stannis' fleet pressed on, oars beating a steady rhythm, sails bellied by the wind. Confident in their numbers, they advanced, planning to crush the tiny Lannister fleet that withdrew upriver in a feigned panic. Tyrion's plan hinged on luring them in. He had stuffed several ships with wildfire, waiting for the right moment to detonate the infernal substance. Sandor had caught a glimpse of the alchemist's store once. He shuddered to recall the sickly green glow in those sealed clay pots. True fire was already horrifying enough, wildfire was a beast of nightmares. "Keep it away from me," he prayed, lips curling. The horns blared again, and the watchers on the walls shouted. Sandor peered out to see the Lannister ships pulling back still, luring the first lines of Stannis' fleet deeper into the bay. Then came the sign. One of the trailing Lannister hulks, apparently crippled, drifted broadside. As the enemy closed, the hulking ship erupted in green flame, the wildfire blossoming like a demon's flower across the surface of the water. Screams carried across the bay as men leapt from their decks, aflame even in the sea. In seconds, half a dozen more wildfire caches ignited, turning that stretch of water into a searing green inferno. Stannis' ships in the rear, still coming forward, had no room to maneuver. That was when Tyrion's chain was cranked into place, sealing off their retreat. The watchers on the ramparts cheered, though many also gaped in horror at the devastation unleashed. Hell on water, Sandor thought grimly as he witnessed a galley's mast snapping, the men aboard flailing like rag dolls. By the gods, if that touches the shore, a shiver ran up his spine. Some ships managed to land on the south bank, out of the wildfire's reach. A few beached under the city walls and disgorged archers, cutthroats, whatever soldiers they carried. From his vantage, Sandor saw that these men now threatened to open a path into King's Landing or cause chaos while Stannis advanced. Tyrion shouted for a sortie, someone had to push them back from the gates. Balon Swan, a fellow Kingsguard knight, found Sandor among the swirling ranks. "Come, Clegane," he said, visor up to show a face set in determination. "We'll ride out with the men at arms. Drive them back into the water." Sandor gave a terse nod, though his gut tightened at the notion of battling near flame. He strode to his stallion. The black horse tossed its head, sharing in the tension that lay over the city. Together, they rode out through the mud gate like a wedge, Balon on Sandor's flank, a ragged swath of sellswords and gold cloaks straggling behind. The moment they emerged onto the banks, smoke assailed them, a choking, bitter haze that made eyes water. Fires burned on the water, green patches swirling with the currents and drifting ever closer to the shore. There, Balon pointed. A group of archers from a half-burned galley was forming up on the muddy bank, trying to loose arrows at the city walls. Sandor set his jaw and spurred the stallion, raising his longsword. The men behind him let out ragged shouts. Arrows whistled by. One struck the man at Sandor's right, toppling him from his saddle with a grunt. Another grazed Sandor's thigh, but it failed to punch through his mail. He reached the archers, his sword flashing in a deadly arc. He split one archer's skull with a single blow, yanked the blade free, then rammed his horse's shoulder into another, sending him sprawling. The rest scattered, and the men from King's Landing quickly overwhelmed them. Sandor glanced sideways, searching for more threats. A fresh dread seized him at the corner of his vision, wildfire creeping across the waves and seeping toward the wooden wharfs. Sparks carried on the wind, threatening to set the entire shoreline ablaze. Fire. It was always fire. His breath grew shallow, sweat collecting under his helm. "Don't look at it," he told himself. "Keep killing, dog. Focus on the fight, not the flames." But the fire was too near, the heat licking his exposed skin. The memory of his face pressed into hot coals flared, more vivid than the screams around him. His stallion shrieked, rearing back from the rising flames. Sandor couldn't quell the surge of panic that hammered in his chest, forcing him to freeze. Balon Swan's voice drifted through the haze, muffled, "Clegane. We need," but Sandor hardly heard him. His eyes were locked on those creeping tongues of green. It was as though the flames alone existed, devouring any sense of reason he had. Then a splintering crash rang out, part of the old jetty cracked under the rising heat, sending a blossom of sparks into the air. The wave of scorching air slapped him. Too much, Sandor thought. He seized the reins, yanking the horse around. He heard men calling after him, some cursing, others in panic, but it made no difference. He kicked his mount into a gallop, fleeing the water's edge, pounding back through the open gate. The city swallowed him up, distant from that inferno. Yet the taste of terror lingered, an acrid dryness on his tongue. He almost retched at how hard his heart hammered. At once he found himself confronted by Tyrion in the courtyard. The dwarf was half spattered with someone's blood, helmet askew, a wild look in his mismatched eyes. "Where are you going?" Tyrion demanded, voice sharp with disbelief. "Get back out there, you coward." Sandor dismounted with a snarl, nearly stumbling in his haste. "Fight it yourself, imp. I'm done." He pushed Tyrion back, causing the dwarf to stagger. "We need," Tyrion started, but Sandor cut him off. "Need me?" Sandor let out a cold laugh. "I've hacked and killed and done every dirty deed this city required. I won't burn for your king." He tore the white cloak from around his shoulders, the one that marked him as Joffrey's sworn shield, and flung it onto the ground. Its fabric smeared in the mud. "Here's your loyalty, Lannister. Here's your honor. Fuck the king." Tyrion's face twisted in rage and desperation, but shouts from the walls erupted again, telling of fresh attackers. The dwarf spared Sandor a final glare, then wheeled about to direct other men. No one dared bar the hound's path. In the chaos, who would enforce the will of a half-man over a rampaging warrior? Sandor stalked up the winding roads toward the Red Keep, weaving around frantic small folk clutching at sacks of meager possessions. A mother wailed as she dragged her children away from the danger. Guards brandishing spears herded the crowds and prevented them from storming the castle gates. Sandor kept going, silent, letting his presence and size clear a path. At the upper gate, the red walls loomed. The guards there stepped aside instantly, faces pale. They recognized the hound, and none had news of his desertion from the battle. Sandor slipped into the courtyard and made for his chambers. Inside, he heard a distant, dull roar from below as the next wave of chaos thundered across the docks. He entered his sparse room. A single lantern flickered, throwing weak light on the bare walls. Sandor rummaged in the battered wooden chest near the bed, pulling out a sack of gold coins, all he possessed after years of blood-soaked service. Enough to buy a new horse, maybe bribe a few men if I need safe passage out. He also took a dagger and stuffed it in his belt, then grabbed a heavy cloak to conceal his face and armor. "I'll ride away from this damned city tonight." He slung the bag of coins over his shoulder, stepping back into the corridor. The keep felt strangely hushed, as if the massive walls were cocooning them from the battle at the gates. Only the faint clang of bells and the muffled boom of catapults told of the war raging outside. He turned a corner and almost collided with a slight figure standing just beyond a flickering sconce. Sansa Stark. She wore a large, dirty cloak that draped over her slender frame, but there was nothing meek in her stance. She stood tall, and in her hands, she held a massive greatsword, the ripple of Valyrian steel catching the torchlight. Its pommel bore a direwolf's head. Ice. Sandor's mind reeled. How in all the seven hells? He froze. Her eyes were not the eyes of a frightened child. They were resolute. She looked at him with a set jaw, firm though her knuckles whitened from gripping the hilt of that enormous blade. He remembered how that sword was rumored lost, how Sir Ilan Payne had carried it since Eddard Stark's execution. But rumors had been flying these last days, darker than crows. Ilan Payne had died, hacked apart by some faceless killer in the Red Keep's bowels. The whispers said the scene was so gruesome that few believed a single man could have done it alone. Sandor exhaled, thinking, whoever butchered that mute headsman must have been working for the Starks, and they gave her ice. For a moment, he could not speak. Sansa Stark, the little bird, stood before him with her father's ancestral greatsword in her grip, so incongruously large that it dwarfed her slight figure. Yet she looked more determined than he had ever seen her. There was none of the trembling fear from earlier weeks and months, when Joffrey's cruelty had left her cowering. Sandor tightened his hold on his own sword belt. He saw no sign of tears or frailty in Sansa. Her gaze flicked to the bag slung over his shoulder, to the battered cloak draped around his armor. Understanding lit her features. She did not speak, but her lips parted. His body tensed, wondering if she meant to challenge him. To stand in his way. He swore he could see the flicker of fury in her eyes, a strength he had never credited her for possessing. So the little bird is done singing sweet songs in gilded cages, is she? He took one step closer. Her grasp on ice tightened, but she made no motion to swing. He realized she was not brandishing it at him, not exactly, she was simply ready, in case. Sandor let out a slow breath. Gods, but this is a sight. An unarmored slip of a girl with a sword bigger than her body, facing down the hound. In the corridor's flickering torchlight, they stared at one another. Her cloak shifted, revealing bruises on her arm, tokens of the many abuses she had suffered. But she held herself with a new, rigid pride. The tall steel in her hands gleamed with lethal promise. Sandor found himself more unsettled by her resolve than by any man he had cut down in battle. You've changed, he thought. Or maybe I just never knew you at all. He realized with a faint shock that he didn't know if she meant to kill him or join him or beg him for help escaping. Voices drifted from an adjacent hallway, servants or guards, likely. Sansa's expression shifted, as if she too heard them. She stepped away from the sound, moving deeper into the shadows, but she never took her eyes off Sandor. Her lips pressed tight together, her chin lifted. A question seemed to hang on the air. He felt his throat tighten. The plan had been simple. Gather what he needed, slip away, leave the city to burn behind him. But seeing her like this, she's no lamb for the slaughter, not anymore. The memory of her beaten face at Joffrey's hands flashed in his mind, and a surge of anger rose unbidden in his gut. She should have never been here. Clattering footsteps echoed around the corner. In the distance, someone shouted orders. The castle was not safe. Nowhere was safe. They still had some fleeting moment of silence here, but that would soon vanish. His breath rasped against the inside of his helm. He tried to speak, but the words stuck. Finally, he managed a low, rumbling question. Little bird, you going to kill me with that? He inclined his head at the Valyrian steel. The use of his old nickname for her was almost gentle, despite the tension in his voice. Sansa's lips parted again. The anger, the defiance in her eyes did not fade, but her voice, when it emerged, was quiet, firm. If you try to stop me, she said, I'll do what I must. Sandor let out a short, humorless laugh. Stop you from what? I'm not your jailer, girl. He took another step closer, so they were almost face to face, the length of ice between them. Where'd you get that sword? Her expression hardened. From the one who avenged my father. Her knuckles tightened on the grip, but there was no tremor. Sir Ilyn paid for his crimes. Sandor took that in, remembering the rumors. A Stark agent indeed, and they gave her ice. So she's carrying her father's blade. She's, like a ghost of House Stark, come back to haunt these halls. He found the notion strangely fitting. Another crash echoed from outside, and a faint roar signaled fresh trouble at the gates. Sansa glanced away for the barest instant, her composure flickering. Then she looked back at Sandor, eyes fierce. Are you deserting them? She did not call him a coward, her tone was too neutral. But the question hovered, unspoken. Why are you running? He hissed softly. I'm done with their battles, done with their filthy city and their spineless king. Let the flames take them. I owe them nothing. Sansa's mouth set in a straight line. She didn't argue the point, didn't call him monstrous or craven. Instead, she lifted the sword with an effort, resting its huge blade against her shoulder. Then you'll have no reason to stop me from leaving, she said quietly. I'm done with them too. Sandor felt something twist inside his chest. He had half expected to see her cowering in a corner, or scurrying to the queen's side. Instead, she was forging her own path. He did not know if he admired that or resented it. They'd kill you if they found you with that blade, he said. Or throw you to the mob. Her grip on ice did not waver. Then they'd better not find me. A heavy moment of silence, broken only by the distant cacophony of war. Sandor felt the weight of his armor pressing on him, along with the confusion swirling in his head. Finally, he let out a breath, adjusting the bag of gold slung over his shoulder. Go, he muttered, not quite sure why. Or come with me, I don't care, just don't stand here waiting for them. He turned, prepared to move down the corridor, half expecting her to slip away in the opposite direction. Yet Sansa took a tentative step after him, not quite closing the distance. Her expression still flared with that resoluteness, but there was a flicker of uncertainty too. No longer the shy bird in the cage, but a fledgling unsteady on new wings. Her father's sword was a tangible testament to her boldness, and a reminder that she was dreadfully out of place in these halls. Sandor's heart thudded, and for an instant, he glimpsed the swirl of possibilities. He could try to help her escape. Or he could walk away and let her find her own fate. He still hadn't decided, but for the moment, they stood at an impasse, breathing the same smoky air, while outside the city roiled in pandemonium. Beyond the corridor, torchlight wavered. Boots pounded somewhere close. Sandor clenched his teeth. No more time for this. With one last look, he saw the steely resolve in her eyes, her fingers clenched around the hilt of ice. He had never seen Sansa Stark so sure of herself, nor so willing to risk all for freedom or revenge. The little bird was no more. In her place stood a young wolf, perhaps, or something equally fierce. And yet, he could not find the words. He gave a short, rough nod, acknowledging her stance, her choice. Then he turned away, steps echoing as he strode into the gloom, uncertain if she would follow or flee elsewhere. But in that last glimpse, he recognized that she had changed, and so had he. Gone was the obedient dog. Gone was the timid bird. He might have told her that the world outside was cruel beyond measure. He might have warned her that men would kill to reclaim ice or to hurt her in the name of the Lannisters. But the words never passed his lips. Instead, he left the corridor behind, the roar of battle creeping closer. Behind him, the last thing he saw before turning the corner was Sansa Stark standing tall, blade in hand, the faint glimmer of torchlight reflecting in her eyes. And as the tumult of the city enveloped him, Sandor Clegane found himself thinking, "Burn, King's Landing, for all I care. I've no more part in your madness." Yet in the back of his mind lingered the image of that girl, resolute and unyielding, carrying the sword of a dead lord. It was a sight that shook him almost as much as the flames had. So he went on, with no answers, no direction, just the echo of her stance etched into his thoughts, unable to forget her or the steel she bore. And the city thundered with war and wildfire, echoing behind him as if the gods themselves were tearing the night apart. 19 comments 0 vote. Chapter 40. 5 chapters further in all my stories here. Patreon.com/Niflheim. Chapter 40. Robb Stark. The morning air was crisp, tinged with the faint metallic scent of forged iron and worked wood. Robb Stark stood in the center of a makeshift shooting yard hastily erected on the fringes of their encampment. The ground was churned with the footprints of men and the occasional hoofmark, blending into the damp earth. Target dummies, little more than hastily stitched sacks stuffed with straw and bound to crude wooden frames, stood at varying distances. An aged craftsman approached, his hands rough and stained with soot and oil, clutching a bulky crossbow. The design was rudimentary, far from the polished weapons that graced the armories of proud lords. Its frame was plain, the wood unpolished, the mechanism exposed with crude metal fittings. "As you instructed, my lord," the craftsman said, holding the weapon out. "We've managed to separate the parts for easier assembly. It's simple enough now that each component can be made independently. But, in exchange, the performance," he hesitated, glancing at the weapon, "is below what you'd expect from a standard crossbow." Robb took the weapon without a word, his face a mask of impassivity. He inspected it, fingers tracing the lines where wood met iron, then loaded a bolt with methodical precision. Raising it to his shoulder, he aimed at one of the distant dummies. The bolt loosed with a mechanical thunk, its flight slower than expected, embedding into the target with little more than a shallow bite. He lowered the crossbow and gave a single nod, devoid of disappointment or approval. "How many of these could you produce if you had a large number of unskilled apprentices?" The craftsman's eyes lit up, understanding dawning. "With the old design, we were lucky to manage 10 in a month, and each apprentice needed near a year's training to handle the full process. But with this method, I could teach new apprentices to craft just one part each. Simple tasks, easy to master. I can't give an exact figure, but, at least 50 per month, provided I have the hands and the materials." Robb nodded again, handing the crossbow back. "The design isn't ready. Work on improving its performance. You'll receive the usual payment." The craftsman bowed slightly, relief and ambition mingling in his features. "Of course, my lord. I'll see to it." As the man disappeared into the bustle of the camp, Brynden Tully approached, his easy stride contrasting Robb's stoic stillness. His sharp eyes glanced at the retreating figure of the craftsman before settling on Robb. "Crossbows. I've always preferred a good longbow in a man's hands. Faster reload, better range. Why bother with these cumbersome things? He asked. Robb's expression remained unchanged. A skilled bowman takes years to train. Sometimes, starting with his grandfather. A crossbowman requires weeks. Their lack of power and precision is irrelevant when there are hundreds firing together. He turns to his granduncle. We know that Tywin headed southeast from Harrenhal. This clearly is to establish an alliance with the Reach. He explains. His own armies are very depleted, and the Crownlands shall be too. Once they face Stannis, that leaves the Reach. These crossbows are meant to be used in a strategy against them. To a certain point, yes. Robb nods. The Reach can raise as many men as 100,000, out of that number we can reliably gauge that roughly 60 to 70,000 of the air levies, poor, mal-equipped, and without discipline, and no match with our experienced infantry in quality. The issue is their 30 to 40,000 cavalries. The Reach have a great culture of chivalry. Their knights may have heads filled with tall tales and exceedingly inflated self-worth, but they are also well trained and equipped, even if they lack experience. Brynden, with a thoughtful look on his face, nods. That is true, and worrying. I cannot imagine what a charge of 40,000 knights would even look like. If we are to contend with it, better strategies and tactics may not suffice. Robb elaborates further. We need the necessary tools to employ these. Our smaller size allows us quicker movement and alacrity within the battlefield, but we will need better methods to hold strategic points without significant defenses. Crossbowmen are going to be one part of that effort. The Red scratches his chin in thought. That is a valid point, provided we have the numbers, digging trenches against a hill and filling them to the brim with crossbowmen. He almost blanches. Additionally, if we give the enemy a single path to cross, pitting them against a wall of pikemen, that would be a nightmare to breach. That is one way to make use of crossbowmen, yes. Robb replies. Nonetheless, I don't need all of our infantry forces. I am of the belief that a smaller yet more disciplined force with a skilled commander always triumphs against a larger one with lesser quality and a bad general. Yet things are not that simple, and more versatility won't do us any wrong, so finding a use for the leftovers is a good use of resources. Brynden follows. I understand. Robb nods in assent. We march soon, Brynden added after a pause. The men are ready. Our next stop is High Heart. Might be the hideout of the Brotherhood without banners. Or just well-armed bandits. Robb's gaze remained fixed on the distant horizon. My father sent Beric Dondarrion to deal with the Mountain. The Mountain is dead. They should have disbanded. Brynden shrugged. Men who fight together often find reasons to stay together. Camaraderie, purpose, even after the cause is gone. Robb stared into the distance, his face an unchanging mask. Only his words hinted at the thoughts beneath. We'll see. The wind picked up slightly, ruffling the banners of the Stark host, as silent and steadfast as their young lord. Asterisk. Robb rode on his horse on a sedate pace, the sound of the march echoing through the lands. He couldn't help but think about his recent endeavors, especially during their travels toward Harrenhal. There were several reasons why, despite having a large army as a future adversary, Robb opted to take his time moving the army to Harrenhal. First, there is the whole Frey fiasco, with Stevrin Frey and his closest family members sent in advance to take and prepare Harrenhal for their arrival. It would behoove him to secure his hold over the twins. Securing the Frey's allegiance and loyalty is even more important for him than it was for the Tullys. After all, his greatest support comes from the north, and the Freys with their strategic location have the ability to cease all transport from and to the north by land by simply shacking up their 4,000 men on the King's Road, at least before an army is sent to chase them back to the twins. It is that strategic location that forced his hand. The late Walder Frey is only loyal to himself, so his influence within the castle has to be diminished, shifting to the hands of Stevrin Frey and his grandson, Black Walder, who both hold a life department to him, and would acquiesce to most of his demands as long as they didn't bring ruin to their house. Second, is giving Arya some much-needed tutelage on the Force. It is unfortunate that all of his siblings are not old enough to receive a comprehensive education in the Jedi ways, giving them well-rounded abilities in most disciplines, but Robb's second life was one as a Jedi Lord, and as the masters of his time were forced to, he had to take in many apprentices as long as they were Force-sensitive, no matter their age. War always forces one's hand. A person strong enough with the Force can catch up to normal Jedi as late as 16 years old, but aside from probably Bran and Jon, the rest of his siblings lack the sensitivity necessary to bridge the gap without the necessary mindset. Not only that, but opening their minds to different aspects of the Force might lead them to be scattered enough to be corrupted by the dark side, and we can't have that. So, he needed to find the best suitable training plan for each of his siblings. Sansa was honestly simply a fluke. He simply hypothesized that her connections with beasts might be heightened after her bond with Lady was broken with the latter's death. His gamble paid off, as Sansa seemed to almost overspecialize in the art of animal bonding, her bond with the Weirwood network helping things along. But Arya's situation is different. For one, her bond with Nymeria is still intact, lacking any to the Weirwoods. Secondly, he doubts Arya has the patience to sit still long enough to learn anything worthwhile. So, he has ideas, but none are concrete enough to put in actions yet. Plus, Arya just began feeling safe enough to be comfortable. Some more carefree days won't hurt. Third, and most importantly, is to consolidate power. Aside from the phrase, both the Riverlands are ripe with countless nobles with oversized ego and an abundant desire to defy authority. The winds seem to blow one way, the way of his coronation. Most do not know of the fact. The people that matter have no issue, as they are too big and influential to be ignored, yet small enough to be cannibalized by their smaller competitors, which puts their interests alongside his, as long as he was a barrier keeping their houses safe from the jackals. The issue are the smaller and mid-sized houses who'd gladly betray him for a large sum of gold, or the promise of bigger lands, and the generation-long grudges between all of them, the Bracken and Blackwoods, the two Vances, the Smallwood and Vances, a lot of others in House Frey. Grudges grow like weeds on these lands. One way to deal with these grudges is to simply be scary enough that the relevant parties are more terrified of earning his ire rather than make their issues big enough to bother him. He has done that, spending enough time in the yard with the wizened knights and their eager heirs, putting them on their asses with the needed brutality, using his Force empathy liberally to reinforce their feelings of respect and dread. But emotions often deaden when their source is absent, so the time has come for the second solution, marriage. Some comments here and there, putting the needed people together in the required position, giving hinting comments to the relevant people, and suddenly a bevy of people are suddenly betrothed. Lords that would have usually never met each other find themselves future family. His mother, at his urging, was somewhat useful. She wasn't the best manipulator or smooth talker, but that isn't the point. All she needed was to send a message to the ladies of the Riverlands, that he would be grateful if some matches were arranged. Oftentimes all that is needed is to light up the path for people to walk it. Plus, it would be useful to make his mother feel useful, at least for the time being, until his coronation, where he will definitely send her back to Winterfell. The final nail in the coffin was the Lefford girl. Apparently, she was less interested in learning to defend herself as she was in the woman she sought to teach her. Seemingly on the first lesson, the woman gave up, finding the physical exertion too much for her tastes, yet using the meeting as an opportunity to get to know Daisy Mormont. After a while, she finally shot her shot, and was faced with a wall. Turns out, the Lady Mormont didn't enjoy people of the same persuasion, and had rebuffed the lioness somewhat politely. They are still friends, but the issue is that some rumors were scattered from the debacle, somewhat marring Alysanne Lefford's reputation. Rumors with no relevance, Robb thought. Despite the truth behind them, not many put much stock in those tales, believing that it was simply some scorned suitor attempting to dirty her reputation. The issue wasn't that, but with her nature, it seems that the Lefford lady will take her sweet time choosing a suitor, which is disadvantageous, as it is in Robb's advantage to tie her to the Riverlands as soon as possible. It seems that he will have to approach the woman with a proposal. The problem is that it must be someone easygoing with no qualms being inferior in station to another woman, especially one of her persuasions, yet with the bloodline necessary to tie her to an influential house. Doesn't Bracken have a son? He muses. Then he remembers, Janos Bracken had been blessed with naught but daughters from his wife, yet he has a bastard son, one Harry Rivers, known to be fair and comely, and one with a pretty good reputation, all things considered. For one, he is a bastard. His greatest ambition would be to become a knight under his father's banner, a much lower position than the husband of the Lady of the Golden Tooth. Secondly, Robb had met the man, and he had seemed very laid back and humble in both appearances and to his senses, and he doubts he'd find any issues with Alysanne taking charge. And finally, Janos Bracken is quite fond of the boy, which will make him interested in securing a higher position for him. It would be a great method to get in his good graces, facilitating the marriage that is, and would put down any rumors of Robb favoring the Blackwoods over his house. Perhaps a meeting is on the horizon. He thinks. And so, the path to High Heart is filled with plans put in motion, and Robb's position grows more and more secure in anticipation of his coronation. This chapter is meant to be a glimpse into Robb's inner thoughts. The idea is to emphasize that there's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes, a lot of politicking, planning, and putting things in motion so everyone goes the way he wants it. 20 comments 0 vote. Chapter 41. 5 chapters further in all my stories here. Patreon.com/Niflheim. Chapter 41. Thoros of Myr. Lord, please light our fire and shield from the darkness, may your flames scour the world and cleanse it of sin and heresy. The voices of the faithful echoed through their small, makeshift camp. Warm our souls with your loving hearth, and burn away the evils of the great other. For the night is dark and full of terror. Thoros stood up, letting the campfire crackle next to his boots. He held his right hand with his left, feeling the tremors come. Sweat covered his brow, a headache ringing on his head like a constant bell. His tongue went over his dry lips in an effort to moisten them, and he took large gulps from his water skin once that proved ineffective. But the thirst didn't stop, his body craved wine and mead, not water. Perhaps ceasing drinking altogether was a foolish decision. Nothing can go wrong with a drink or two, can it? Thoros shakes his head off those tempting thoughts. No, drink is what drove me away from the faith. I shall no longer allow its seeds of corruption to burrow into my mind. Thoros. Angai puts a hand on his shoulder. We are close, and we must be quick. Thoros blinks and nods. He grabs his sword and his saddlebag. I do not understand why we are here. Angai comments as they get farther away from the fire. We should be out there, giving aid to the unfortunate. If Lord Beric tells of visions of the ghost of High Heart, if he believes that so-called old witch has words to be said, then we shall go there, as is our duty to the Lord of Light's champion. Angai's face morphs into slight annoyance. Thoros understands his reluctance to believe in the Lord. No one such as him would be able to relate more, but the R'hllor has blessed him with proof, turned a false priest such as himself into a believer once more, and so shall Angai and all other men like him, as no one but a god can bring the dead back to life. Plus, I do not think the commoners have need of our help. The Stark boy and the Red have pacified the Riverlands. There are no Lannister men left to torment. Thoros echoes with words that appeal more to Angai's sensibilities. Angai nods once again, yet his eyes looked almost lost. Once apace, Thoros spots the small figure of a small boy with a light purple cloak. Ned, Thoros exclaims. Where is Lord Beric? Edric Dane is Beric Dondarrion's squire, and most importantly, the Lord of Starfall, the House of Knights and Chivalry. He was a handsome boy of 10 and 12 with fair white skin and pale blonde hair. He held a torch in one hand, and as he looked back toward them, Thoros notices that his eyes are a blue so dark they might be purple. Sir Thoros. For their circumstances, Edric's voice was remarkably light and cheery, and he had a quick shy smile to his face. Lord Beric is, relieving himself. Thoros chuckles at the boy's embarrassment, yet before he could tease the brat, a man walks out of the shrubbery. He was a slight man, handsome with red gold hair, or at least, that is what he was, before his many deaths. Now, he had pale, corpse-like skin and a gaunt, skeletal appearance. His right eye had been sunken and collapsed, with dry and cracked lips. A long, ropey scar was adorned around his neck from a previous hanging, while his body was littered with sword and spear wounds, that leaked no blood yet didn't scar either. He wore a black satin cloak decorated with stars, a breastplate of dull black steel that displays a forked purple lightning bolt, a long sword by his side and a black shield slashed by lightning. His eye carried a longing that cannot be understated, a melancholy sadness that only deepened once it came across his own squire. Beric turns to Thoros, his gaze hardening as it came across his. The men are ready. His voice was a hoarse and weak thing, it was so ever since his hanging death. Thoros nods. Good, once we meet the witch, we'll leave. Where? Angai asks. Beric turns to him with a hardened look. That is what we aim to find out. High Heart is known to be a tall hill sacred to the children of the forest, a place where the tree folk would gather and worship the old gods, communing with them through the weirwood trees. According to song, however, the Andal King Erig slaughtered the children of the forest, their animals, and their first men allies at High Heart, after which his men cut down the weirwood grove. History says however that the children of the forest left these lands before the Andals even reached the Riverlands, and that Erig had simply killed the men and cut down the trees. Presently, the small folk evade the area due to superstitious sightings of the wailing ghosts of the children, haunting any who dare get close. Once their group reached the crown of the hill, Thoros couldn't help but think that there was a truth to those superstitions. At the summit, their torches illuminated a ring of 31 gigantic ash-white stumps of the weirwood trees, each one was supposedly a heart tree with faces carved on its surface. The winds howled on the high altitude, creating a sound akin to the echoing howl of dark wraiths. The ground was barren, only littered with the dried sap of the weirwoods that resembled crimson bloody scars, and at the middle, at the center of the ring, was a shabby hut that reeked of herbs and incense. In the distance, a very large camp could be sighted, enough to house thousands of men and women at once, supposedly the camp of the Stark Lord as he makes way to Harrenhal. Both Thoros and the others approached cautiously. The atmosphere brought a primal sort of fear to their hearts, as if they were watched by a monster from some dark tale told to misbehaving children. Before anyone could speak or comment, the door of the hut opened slowly, and as they slowly inched back, cold sweat to their brows, their reason for being there shows herself. The ghost of High Heart was an old, stooped, tiny little woman no more than 3 feet. She had white hair, so long and that its tips were stained brown and red from touching the ground, all stooped and wrinkled and leaning on a gnarled black cane. "Apologies, my lady." Beric was the first to speak. "We didn't mean to barge in like so and disrupt your sleep, it wasn't proper." "You overestimate yourself, puppet." The old woman's voice was scratchy and raspy. "'Tis the old gods that stir and will not let me sleep." Thoros bristles at the mention of her barbaric gods, yet he stills. It is not his place to question others' faith, it is his to show them the light, and the woman's turn shall come, soon. "They show you things?" Beric asks. "Portents of the future?" "Aye." The ghost lets out a breathless chortle. "Cruelties, the gods show me. I dreamt I saw a shadow with a burning heart butchering a golden stag with a cleaver. I dreamt of an old knight, his heart bound in iron, caging the red within him, wounded by the death of a fish, its flame snuffed by a hollow lion. I dreamt the cage had shattered, and the knight raged against the sky, bearing his grief for the world to see. Wrathful he was, with nothing but red upon him. I dreamt of a man without a face, waiting on a bridge that swayed and swung, on his shoulder a drowned crow with seaweed hanging from his wings, unknowing of the prince who once drank the sea and woke heavy with water in his veins, cursed to drift in waking slumber." The dwarf woman was saying. "I dreamt of that broken prince, unchained at the sight of the setting sun, drifting like wreckage upon the tide. But when he laughed to the dawn, oh, I woke from joy and terror warring in my heart. All this I dreamt, and more. Tell me, who can sleep with such dreams?" "What about me?" Beric ignores her question completely. "I saw you in the flames, I saw you show me the way to the light, what do your dreams say about me, ghost?" His words were more pleading than questioning, tinged with sorrows. "How do I end my burden?" "I see, puppet." Her red eyes, once so glazed and vacant, settled on them with piercing focus, bringing shivers to Thoros' spine. "I see a conqueror, paving a path through the lands, until he reaches the cursed fortress, where the echoes of the past whisper warnings to deaf ears. Who faces the bringer of death, the summoner of everlasting winter, in a prison of sacred wood, where the victors of the first war laid down their blades and buried their grudges, entombing the truths of the war for the dawn beneath silence and shadow. It is he who shall stand at the edge of the abyss, and when darkness stretches forth its grasping hand, he shall not falter. Victorious, he shall turn the works of evil upon themselves, and from ruin, he shall raise a bastion of hope. Through him, the shattered legions shall rally. Under his banner, the lost shall find purpose, and the broken shall march once more. Men of the storm and the sun, of the river and the vale, of the mountain and the sea, all shall kneel and rise anew, bound not by crown or coin, but by the fire of a single cause. He shall be more than a king, more than a warrior. A vanguard of mankind, standing unyielding against the tide, the hammer that shatters the ice, the beacon that dares defy the long night." Thoros' breath hitches. He was familiar with those words, he knew the signs they resembled, so he stepped forward. "Who shall be that man?" His voice was filled with hope. Even as he spoke, he glanced at Beric with conviction, certain with his thoughts. "Who is the prince that was promised?" "The prince? Fa." She laughs so loudly it echoes alongside the whistle of the wind. "That prophecy is shattered, its bones ground to dust. The man I speak of is no prince, no heir to a gilded crown." Her speech falters, her breath hitching as her red eyes widen in sudden awe. Slowly, She lifts a trembling finger past them. Turn, puppet, look behind you, and behold the one who will break your chains. Then, they hear it, the crunch of a boot on a broken branch. Entranced by the witch's words, they had never sensed anyone approaching. Thoros' breath hitches, and he slowly, almost fearfully, turns around. The first thing he sees is a wolf, towering as tall as a man and broad as an ox. Beneath its ashen gray fur, thick muscles ripple, built for rending flesh with ease. Its golden eyes sweep over them, slow and deliberate, measuring their worth as if they were prey awaiting the slaughter. Next to him, however, was what seemed like a young man. He was relatively tall, with a lean yet muscular figure, and wore a gray smoky armor adorned with a direwolf's head at its front. On his back lay a cloak as dark as the night, which Thoros thought to be made of crow feathers until he glimpsed its smooth surface. His hair was red, strikingly so, almost matching the weirwood's dried sap lit up by their torches, and extended to his shoulders in wavy, almost wild, curls. What was most striking, however, is that above his same-colored short beard, were eyes that almost shined in the darkness, ice-blue orbs that seemed as if they could glimpse Thoros' soul. Those cold eyes were trained on Barrick's gaunt figure, filled with strong intensity. Interesting. The man's voice was deep, and so stoic as to be chilling. You are a dead man walking. 24 comments 0 vote. Chapter 42. 5 chapters further in all my stories here. Patreon.com/Niflheim. Chapter 42. Robb Stark. He stared blankly at the walking cadaver before him. He could feel the dark side wafting from his body like a nasty smell. Interesting, he comments. You are a dead man walking. Dondarrion lets out a self-depreciating smirk, dissipating the tension. You have no idea, my lord. Robb felt the urge to frown. It seems the man thought him to be joking. I don't believe you understand. Robb says. You are dead. The man you know as Beric Dondarrion has ceased to exist. Had he the capability to be paler, Beric would have certainly done so. You are but a body, puppeteered by a remnant of what you were, memories put into a cadaver to bring it to life, quite useful, did it not come with a price. He explains. You feel it, don't you? That cold fire within you, clinging to your body, pulling you somewhere else, somewhere dark, silent, and void. A snarl came to Thoros' face, as he stepped forward and put a hand to his sword. How dare you, he snapped, pointing toward Dondarrion. He is the Lord's champion. The great other's doom. His rusty blade unsheathed and pointed toward him. Greywind did not appreciate the aggressive gesture, so he steps forward and growls toward the offending priest. Is that what you truly believe, truly? Robb asks, his steps echoing through the silence as he slowly approaches the man in red robes. Whom are you addressing with those words? Is it I, or yourself? He kept walking until the blade's dull edge gingerly rested on his shoulder, and whilst Robb stayed unperturbed, knowing that he'd be able to not only dodge, but decapitate the man should he even think of attacking, his own friends do not. A young-looking man with a freckled face and red hair pokes Thoros with his bow. Do not be daft, Thoros. He hisses. That is Robb Stark. If that monstrous wolf doesn't crush your skull with its maw, that huge army less than a mile away from us will certainly gut you. But Thoros kept glaring, his eyes filled with untold fury. Your words ring false, Stark. He grits out. I held Beric's cold body with my own hands, I gave him the last kiss, the good God's kiss of life, and felt the fire of the Lord alight his hearth of life. Your temptation will not, cannot, stray me away. Not again, he whispers, unheard for none but Robb. Your understanding of faith is wrong, priest. Robb says. It does not dwindle, it does not disappear. Once you cease to believe, once proven wrong, your belief, your convictions, your devotion and loyalty is simply shifted toward worthier causes. With a finger, Robb pushes the blade's edge away, taking another step forward, staring the man straight in the eyes. Look at him, look at the man who you deem your chosen one. Thoros turns his eyes away and to Beric. The latter was stood stock still, a chagrined face on his face. Every single time his time comes, you pull him from the peace of the afterlife. Every time he comes back, he is even more lost, even lesser than he was. That is torture, not a blessing. He says. Tell me, Thoros of Myr, what benevolent God would curse a man with such suffering? Were you in his place, would you not feel the same despair, the same longing? And there, acceptance. Thoros falls to his knees, his own sword fell alongside him, clanging to the ground. Robb turns to Beric. You have two choices, Lord of Lightning, either I liberate you peacefully, or I forcefully snatch your ghost from the grasp of whatever entity enslaved you. I shall give you time to say your goodbyes. Even through his dismay, Dondarrion nods. Robb turns to the frail old woman, walking toward her. It is an honor to meet someone of your skill, old lady. Robb says to the diminutive witch. It is very impressive what you did, staring through my veil. And it was right, his skill of obfuscation through the Force was tempered through conflict with the Sith Empire's formidable clairvoyance. Brute force alone is not enough to even have a glimpse of his actions. Bloodraven, who had more power than sense, was proof of that fact. The woman's face was a gnarly sight. What you call impressive, some may call a curse. She murmurs. I have gorged myself on grief at Summerhall, yet the old gods have seen to stuff me with more. I spend my days searching through their whispers for the briefest traces of hope. I thank you, Stark Lord, for you have soothed my wounded heart. Robb inclines his head ever so briefly in acknowledgement. We all have our burdens to bear. The ghost of High Heart turns toward her humble shack. Please, do go in. She bids. It is not often I have such august guests. I would have thought you used to receiving lords during your time at court. Robb answers. I said not often, didn't I? Asterisk. Robb and the witch spoke for hours during the night. They spoke of the state of the world. She opened herself up about her adventures with Jenny of Oldstone and the horror of the burning of Summerhall, and Robb bid her request to speak of his deepest secrets. He spoke of his inner grief, his anger and frustration at his inability to express emotion. He told her of his plans, on how he plans to unite the lands in preparation of the long night, yet she only wished to hear of the small stories, his childhood in Winterfell and the childish troubles he'd gone through. He told her of how he missed his brothers and sister, how worried he is about Sansa even though she should be on her way here, how he regrets the stupidity of others, and how he blames his own mother for some of his predicaments. The woman, who still had no name, simply listened with an ugly, yet peaceful, smile. And as the first lights of dawn poured through the cracks on her wooden shacks, the ghost of High Heart took to her last slumber, dead with a smile, and a last, hopeful whisper. Jenny. Robb came out of the hut gingerly carrying the dead woman's corpse. He looked to the group of shaken-up Brotherhood, and asks for a shovel. He digs her own grave right in the middle of the hill himself. A thin man who looks in his 50s approaches with a harp on his hand. Tom Sevenstrings, a name often told of as a famous Riverlands bard who joined the Brotherhood without banners. A song, for her spirit? He asks. He nods. Jenny's song. Robb answers. Very well. The man nods. High in the halls of the kings who are gone, Jenny would dance with her ghosts. Asterisk. After a somber ceremony, the ghost of High Heart was finally laid to rest, and as Robb glanced at her grave, he felt the presence of someone else step to his side. 60. Dondarrion breaths out. 60 of us set out to bring the king's justice to the mountain. 60 brave men and true, led by a fool in a starry cloak. Robb looks to the man, who almost flinches at his sight, but at the end, his dead lips fall on a self-depreciating smile. They say I was a comely lad in a pretty cloak, slight and callow. They say I was a valiant knight, inexperienced and dashing, blind to the world's horrors. Beric muses. Can I dwell on what I scarce remember? I held a castle on the marches once, and there was a beautiful woman I was pledged to marry, but I could not find that castle today, nor tell you the color of that woman's hair. Who knighted me? What were my favorite foods? Who was Beric Dondarrion? Beric's gaze turned to the sun, its first lights covering the hill in a breathtaking shade of red. It all fades. Sometimes I think I was born on the bloody grass in that grove of ash, with the taste of fire in my mouth and a hole on my chest. He holds a hand over his chest, caressing the wound that was proof of his first death. Fire consumes. It consumes, and when it is done there is nothing left. Nothing. Are those your last words, Lightning Lord? Robb asks. Do you think I am a brave man, Lord Stark? Robb stays silent, but Beric just laughs. My men tell me I was brave, that I stared death in the face with no fear. Yet I think that the difference between a brave man and a coward is that both are afraid, but the brave man acts anyway. And any man who does things simply because he is not afraid is not brave but an idiot. I believe that before that first death, I was an idiot. An idiot who rose to be a coward. The foolish boy who felt no fear tasted death and saw its horrors. Now he knew fear, but could not act through it. Beric looks back to his companions, a sad expression on his face. And the brave men beside me did nothing, as even brave men blind themselves sometimes, when they are afraid to see. Looking back, Edric Dane held onto Angai's leg, his face smushed on his stomach as he cried his heart out, while Thoros and half of the men couldn't turn to look at him. Seeing that woman die with a smile brought hope to me. Maybe death isn't a horror to be feared, but a peaceful ending to our journey. But now that my time has come, I feel that I am more afraid than I can remember. Beric looks to Robb, his smile turning warm. But I am ready, a man has to be brave, doesn't he? Robb nods. Very well, kneel. Beric slowly gets on his knees, he looks up to Robb's unflinching eyes with tears on his eye, the droplets coming out dark as if tainted. Robb held his head with a hand, his thumb over the crown of his head. Take care of my men, they are good guys, one and all, better than any knight I know, and my betrothed, tell her that I loved her, even if I cannot remember her name or how she looked, she ever still brought warmth to my cold dead heart. Beric sobs. And Edric, he is a good boy, so find him a brave man to squire under, perhaps not yourself, but he deserves a good mentor to make him the man I know he can be. Anything else? Beric shakes his head, trembling all the while. You were a good man, Beric Dondarrion. Robb finally says. I will make sure you are remembered. Robb extended his senses to the depth of Beric's spirit, feeling malice clinging to it, an echo of suffering long past. Closing his eyes, he exhaled slowly, centering himself in the warmth of the Force. He extended his hands, allowing the light to flow through him like a river, a beacon in the abyss. The air shimmered around his fingertips as he reached out, not to destroy, but to heal. Golden light radiated from his palms, washing over the Lightning Lord's body like a cleansing tide. He could hear the sounds of exclamation coming from the side, but he powers through, as his work wasn't yet over. The golden light washed through Beric's body, finally coming across a dark shadow in its depth. The shadow writhed against the purifying light of the Force to no avail, dissipating away. The light slowly faded away from Dondarrion's eye, as the golden light surged forth, upward to the sky, fading into a wispy light that momentarily resembled a man's silhouette. The man in the light, for a split second, resembled a dashing, healthier version of the dead man, and looked down at them with untold warmth, before dissolving into the sun's light. By the gods, Angai was the first to exclaim, followed by the others who shared looks of disbelief. Robb turned to them, pointedly staring at the gaping face of Thoros of Myr. He is in a better place now. 29 comments 0 vote. Chapter 43. 5 chapters further in all my stories here. Patreon.com/Niflheim. Chapter 43. Tyrion Lannister. Tyrion has his show injury instead of the books. The only thing I liked about the former is this part. Didn't like how Gur just made Tyrion's appearance worse, even if it was very on point with his character and really matched the plot, I didn't care. He's also so very annoyed, because in his eyes, he's the only person who's doing anything well in the family. The first thing he felt was pain in his chest, in his limbs, from his bones, seeping to his flesh as if he'd ran from Sunspear to the wall. Yet the worst was in his face, a searing burning sensation that went from one side to the other. Instinctively, he extended a hand to touch it, only to find gauze and herb paste, on the way. Now that he was awake, he could smell the scent of dried blood and milk of the poppy. That explains the drowsiness, he thinks. But, when he opens his eyes, he is startled when beyond his bandages, he glimpses the withered old face of one Grandmaster Pycelle. Pod, he croaks out. Pod, he screams. His squire barges in quickly. Yes, my lord. Find Bronn or Varys. Tyrion orders. Tell them I am here with Grandmaster Pycelle. Tell them, I am very much alive. My lord, Pod answers. Everyone knows you are alive, and Lord Tywin himself ordered to be informed the moment you wake up. Then go, inform him. Yes, my lord. As Pod went out to do his bidding, Pycelle simply turned back toward Tyrion and smiled. Do you need something for the pain? Tyrion ignores his statement entirely. Where am I? What happened? His eyes roam his surroundings. He was in a cramped room in what seems as a sequestered part of the Red Keep, not exactly a hovel, but he also wouldn't call it luxurious either. These are your new chambers, a little cramped perhaps, but you don't need much, do you? The old man seems to have quite a bit of joy at his expense. As for what happened, well, the murderer and traitor Stannis Baratheon suffered a stunning defeat at the hand of your father. The Grandmaster turns to the door, but just before leaving, he turns toward him. "Oh, and you are no longer Hand of the King." He then saunters out, humming a joyous tune all the while. Tyrion simply lays still, stewing on his thoughts. Primarily, he thinks on his injury, and who was responsible for his murder attempt. The last thing he remembers is Mandon Moore, that lifeless husk of a knight, attempting to kill him before he got pushed into the Blackwater by Podrick. The real issue was, who the hell ordered that man to do it? In fact, Tyrion had no idea where Mandon's loyalty lay in the first place. The former Kingsguard never gave his intentions away. He was very much emotionless with his fish-like dead eyes. Most importantly, he tended to keep to himself, not really socializing with anyone. Before his thoughts could dive in deeper, he finally sees Pod come back, with Varys at his back. "Lord Tyrion." Varys nods in greetings. "It gladdens my heart to see you alive, my friend." Tyrion groans as he sits up. He extends his arm to hold on a table only to find them too short. The only reason he doesn't fall back on his bed is Pod's support. "Define alive." Tyrion hisses in pain. "Because it doesn't feel like it to me." Varys tilts his head, squinting as if he wished to stare through his bandages. "From first glance, it does seem like it could be worse." He shrugs. "But I digress, there is much to discuss, and much more that occurred while you were unconscious." "How long was I incapacitated, anyway?" Tyrion asks. "Not long, my lord," Podrick answered. "Some 3 days." "Not long indeed," Tyrion says. "Varys, I believe I have the abject honor of being deemed your friend, so I must confer with you, as I have no other who might help otherwise." Varys simply stares back, an amused smile on his face. These injuries, battle scars they may be, were brought not by the sword of Stannis men, but by the hand of one Esser Mandon Moore. He turns to Pod. "If it weren't for my valiant knight here, then I fear some man, or woman's, plot might have succeeded, and you would have been short a friend." Varys titters. "I fear you are right, you are my friend, and I find friends to be little and scarce lately." He replies. "Yet I have no inkling of that scheme you speak of. My trade lies in secrets, hidden desires and spoken of plots. If someone, as you say, urged our august member of the Kingsguard to get rid of you, then it went either in spoken, it was in the midst of the chaos of the battle, or at the hands of someone with the skills to do so. I will say this, however." Varys continues. "Esser Mandon Moore was a Kingsguard almost worth the name. He was a skilled warrior, but most importantly, a man who could see beyond the simple pleasures of life. If someone managed to set him off against you, no simple sum of gold or woman's touch would be enough. There are few people who could push him to act." "People like mine own sister." Varys nods. "Indeed, your suspicion might be right. Our queen has the motive, opportunity, and means to do so." He explains. "Yet I cannot definitely confirm her involvement." Tyrion sighs. "Whoever it is, it doesn't matter much. Their attempt failed, and their trace is hidden." He turns to Pod. "Speak to Bronn, tell him I wish for at least 4 loyal men guarding me at all times, gold cloaks loyal to him first." "Apologies, my lord." Pod lowers his head apologetically. "But Bronn has been relieved from his duties as Lord Commander of the Gold Cloaks." "Sellswords then, people he knows and whose loyalty can be secured with the type of gold that comes constantly, and not in a single lump sum." Pod nods. "Very well." As Pod paddles away to follow his orders, Varys looks back at him with a smile. "Loyal chap, that boy," he says. "If only more men were made of the same make." Tyrion coughs and chuckles at the same time. "The world would be a much more boring place, wouldn't you think?" As they laughed, a man in red armor walks in. He stares at both Varys and Tyrion and bows with respect. "My lords, the Lord Hand has called a session of the small council. Both of you were called. You do realize I am injured, right?" The man simply stares back at Tyrion, until Tyrion gives up on the staring contest and sighs. "Very well," he groans, and with great difficulty, he manages to stand up. "Help me find some decent garments, will you?" he asks. "I don't think my great father would appreciate me attending a small council session with my ass bare for all to see." You are late. The first thing he hears as he walks in is his sister's scorn. Tyrion limps forward, grabbing the first available seat, which was incidentally on the other side of the table, right in front of his own father, who didn't look pleased at his sight even it was he who called him in. He sits down with a groan. Intimate, lovely table, better chairs than the old small council chamber, and conveniently close to your own quarters. "I like it," he jokes. Kevin, to his father's right, coughs awkwardly to fill the silence as his sister, on the opposite side, glares at him. Varys stares at him in amusement, Pycelle huffs in abject offense, and Littlefinger is somehow missing. Which does bring up the question. Where, pray tell, did Lord Baelish abscond to this time? Tywin simply stares back at him, his gaze as impassive as ever. But Tyrion knew him enough to see the hidden anger beneath those ice-cold eyes, so he simply smiled back in triumph. Lord Baelish has been sent to the Vale. Kevin answers instead, to court Lady Lisa Arryn and bring her kingdom to the fold. So, he aims to marry the wretch. Tyrion wonders. I suppose those rumors do have some grain in truth in them. Baelish did ever brag about his conquest of the Tully sisters, although I doubt his claims of the older to be truth, and I don't imagine Robb Stark would be happy were that to happen. I do not envy our esteemed master of coin, however. Should Lord Baelish courtship be successful, not only will we gain the swords of the Vale to our rightful side, but it would pit Robb Stark against his own aunt. It would be a great blow indeed against that savage upstart, and he can do nothing about it. We shouldn't underestimate the man you call savage upstart, Grand Maester Pycelle. Kevin interjects. He has beaten us so far, after all. Additionally, I don't believe either Lisa Tully nor Baelish are particularly well liked by the houses of the Vale. Rumors of her insanity has tainted the well, so to say. And not to forget, Eddard Stark was fostered into those lands, and has built strong friendships that endear the Starks to them more than they do us. Lord Manderly has seen fit to take a visit to Gulltown, supposedly to purchase steel, silver, and grain in exchange of the plundered goods taken from the Westerlands. Varys says, my little birds speak however that perhaps there is a deeper meaning to the visit. If Manderly can secure the support of the Graftons and the Arryns of Gulltown, then others such as the Royces, Waynwoods, Redforts and Belmore might follow. Kevin shakes his head. Their houses might grumble, but as long as Robin Arryn is alive, they will heed the word of his mother, who heeds Baelish, who in turn, follows our directives. He explains. Enough of this talk. Cersei finally interjects. Our biggest threat is Robb Stark. What do we know of him at the moment? Still moving his army, Your Grace. Varys answers. His host has been marching toward Harrenhal with glacial speed, and he seems to spend his time gathering resources and drilling his soldiers. I also heard that he sent Roose Bolton to the twins, upon which many considered competition to his friend one Stevran Frey in his bid of succession were seen exiled, sworn to the Night's Watch, or forced to give up their right to succeed the house, should the late Lord Frey see his demise. So, he is consolidating his support. Smart. Tyrion says. By the time he reaches Harrenhal I'd wager all the lords of the north and the Riverlands would be like sheep who follow the shepherd's words to the letter. What of Sansa Stark? Kevin asks, upon which Cersei grimaces. What? Tyrion exclaims. What happened to Sansa? That little bitch absconded with that monster Clegane. Cersei blurts out. That beast snuck to the Red Keep during the battle, and took her away. Took her away, took her away, Tyrion screams. You allowed our only hostage to escape. Sansa ****. Sansa was the only thing, the single thing that kept Jaime alive, and you allowed her to escape. I didn't. Cersei shouts right back. You were acting hand of the king, you were responsible for her. Had you not allowed that hound to desert like the dog he was, none of that would have happened. I told you, Tyrion rebukes. The day Ilyn Payne was found dead on his chambers, I ordered for more guards on her person, but no, the queen doesn't trust the gold cloaks, so you had your little monster force the situation. I told you then and there that she was your responsibility, that were she to escape, it would be on your head. But you simply smiled and brushed me off. And would you look at that? Tyrion spreads his arms. My words came true. A bounty was put on her head. Cersei answers, but her voice comes out weaker than before. That whore and her beast can't escape everyone for so long, she will be caught. He looks to his father. You see what I had to deal with while you were away. Our enemies did less harm to us than she did. I had to deal with her foolishness and her son's cruelties while defending this city. She needs to be controlled. Cersei opens her mouth to respond, but is silenced. Tywin raises his hand. Varys, Pycelle, leave us. Once not but Lannisters were left, Tywin finally spoke. Our army is depleted, our enemies multiplying. His voice had a cold fury that brought shivers to Tyrion's back. My son is in custody, Ironborn attack my kingdom. Whilst I am forced to beg those Reacher upstarts. All the while, you quibble amongst yourself like children. he exclaims. Have you no shame, no face for our house, my legacy? Cersei opens her mouth once more. Keep quiet, Tywin orders. For all his wretchedness, Tyrion is right, you have shamed me, wrung our family name into the dirt. What madness befell you, that you let your son act like a beast with no leash? You will control him, or I will have you sold to some man like a common whore, understood? Cersei shakes in her place, but she nods nonetheless. You are excused, but, Tywin turns to her, looking straight at her eyes. She stills in her place, before gulping her saliva and rushing out of the room. And you, Tywin looks to his son. You brought your whore. Tyrion frowns. So, I did what I was told, I saved this city and held ground until you came. What does a random whore have to do with it? Had he the ability to look into another man's mind, Tywin would have known that every single part of that sentence was a lie. But he was not, and so he could not. It is not the fact that you brought her that angers me, it is that you defied an order from me. Tyrion frowns. That is not the reaction I expected, dear father. He says, I knew praise was unrealistic, but for you to nitpick every single one of my decisions, as if you were remiss to even acknowledge any of my good deeds, it paints a rather illogical view of your actions. Tywin almost growls, but is held back by a glance from his brother. So instead, he huffs. So, you did your duty, what do you expect, a reward? Yes. Tyrion doesn't even hesitate. I think that I have proven myself worthy of what should have been mine in the first place. I wish to be recognized as your heir, officially. No, Tyrion is frankly taken back by the sheer amount of hate put into that word, so much so that he isn't even able to answer. I will not have Castle Rock and the Lannister seat taken by a wretched imp like you, to whore its riches down your gullet. Tywin continues. Castle Rock is not a whorehouse, nor a circus. You will not have it. Is he serious? He turns to his uncle, disbelief so blatant on his face. Do you even realize, that among your so-called noble house, I am the only one who held the line? Tyrion is basically frothing at the mouth, his mind too numb to think of restraint. Out of me, Jaime, my bitch of a sister, even both of you. I am the only one. The only one who has remotely gained anything close to a victory. Tyrion points to himself. I dealt with the shit and piss while you lost half our army to a man barely considered an adult. While your proud twins started the war by pushing that kid off that tower, while your worthless grandson sent an assassin after him with his own Valyrian steel dagger. While Cersei was fucking Lancel on the side, and who knows how many other men, and you lost battle after battle, while my own brother was captured by an army half his in size. It was me, he screams. I was the one who escaped the Vale, hundreds of savages at my back while Joffrey's shitty plot was blamed on me. It was me. Who kept this city from imploding into itself, from riots to famine to wilder under our feet. It was me. Who held off Stannis' army. Who encouraged half-starved men onto their deaths while you came in waltzing behind an army that isn't yours. Fuck you. He points at his own father. Fuck you. You unsanctimonious prick, ungrateful man. Who pretends to be my father. I do everything for you, and for what? Nothing. And you have the audacity, the fucking balls to look me in the eye, and berate me because I kept a whore in the castle. Tyrion jumps off his chair, pushing it away. And finally, he feels clarity seep back in, the reality of this situation getting to his head. He finally realized that trying to get what he deserved by getting permission from a man who would never grant it won't work. If he wanted something, he must take it himself. My injuries ail my head. He says, I must leave, or else it may get worse. Tywin violently stood up from his seat. Sit down, he almost shouts. But Tyrion ignores him, fully knowing that Tywin will not forcefully stop him. His father was a man who cannot let himself seem weak, incapable of bending others under his will, even if he truly cannot. Perception mattered to him more than reality, and so Tyrion walked out unimpeded, smiling evilly as he knew, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that this is the angriest he ever made his father. 41 comments 0 vote. Pissed. Download the app for additional rewards. More events, more perks. Winning you more free perks. Download now. Prince of Nilfheim. Download app now. Chapter 44. 5 chapters further in all my stories here. Patreon.com/Niflheim. Chapter 44. Tyrion Lannister. It was barely 2 days later that Tyrion was forced to leave his diminutive quarters. Apparently, his father had been wroth with his previous actions. That developed in 2 simple actions. 1. His allowance has stymied. No longer does he have access to the unending river of gold called his father's purse. Now, he is simply as rich as any of his common cousins. A son of his, no matter how wretched he is, cannot be seen as a pauper. The fact that his own father has run out of enough ways to punish him, enough to resort to such petty actions, is proof enough of the state of his previous treatment. The second measure was thankfully avoided due to the help of one of his few remaining friends. A friend who smiled awkwardly as he and Shay smushed lips like 2 savages. "I have a strong stomach, my friend," Varys comments, staring at their intertwined forms like one would a gruesome death, with disgust yet an inability to look away. "So it is with utmost respect that I ask you to cease your fornication." Tyrion reluctantly pulls himself away. "Is there a matter, Lord Varys?" He jokes. "Does the love of a wretched imp disgust you so?" Varys waves a hand mindlessly. "If that is love, I do not know what lust is." He answers. "But to be serious, Tyrion, what you did that day, to your father, it was heard, and the Lord Hand will do what he must to regain his pride." Shay gently held his cheeks. "Do not worry him so," she says. "Rumors speak of Tyrion's spat with his father. But I heard some are favorable toward him, and are secretly supportive of his words." Tyrion's brows rose to their peak. "Truly," he exclaims, turning to Varys. "Do your little birds corroborate that story?" Varys bows slightly in assent. "In some ways, indeed," he admits. "Your actions during your tenure as Hand are remembered, and many thank you for their protection, as they all remember your actions during the battle against Stannis Baratheon. The people of King's Landing are miserable creatures, much like you, so they share a sense of kinship with someone they see sharing their suffering. Do not forget that many have some grudge against your father, for what happened during the sack some 20 years ago." He explains. "But their memories are also fickle. They'll turn on you as soon as someone better comes along, like, say, a Tyrell to be queen, who is to fill their bellies and soothe their aches." I see, the gears begin to move in Tyrion's mind. This smelled of opportunity, and most importantly, a way to entrench himself before he is discarded for good. He needs to think of a plan, and gather allies, quickly. Or else he'd be forgotten for good, and to be forgotten is worse than being hated. He needed to see with his own eyes, to gather information. "Say, Varys," Tyrion asks, "where and when is the victory feast to be held?" Varys, smile stretched to his ears. Well, what is to be seen is done. Tyrion thinks. He held a goblet filled with watered-down wine, another one of his father's punishments, and stared as every single person in this banquet made a valiant effort to ignore him. Although, he did get to see some mummery. "I am already betrothed, my lady." Joffrey pretended to be chagrined as he stared at the sad, comely form of Margaery Tyrell. "I cannot accept your proposition, Your Grace." The girl spoke. "Sansa Stark is a traitor, and a heathen besides. She does not deserve your hand." His uncle Kevin coughed from the side, half to hide a chuckle, and half to gather attention to his direction. "His Grace is merely betrothed to the girl," he says. "With the blessing of the High Septon, it would not be without precedent to annul such a procedure." The fat man in white garb smiles vainly. "Of course, there was no marriage, and the faith does not stand in opposition to true love." A fake smile was plastered in Joffrey's face. He stood from his throne and walked gracefully to Margaery, holding her hand. "It would be my honor, my lady, to have you as my queen," he says. "Do you accept?" Margaery nods, laughing ecstatically. The minx even managed to eke out a couple of tears. "Yes," she shouts. And then you can imagine the rest. The bards began plying their trade, people drank and ate and danced, while he stood in the corner. Until he felt a hand over his shoulder. He turned around, only to find his Uncle Kevin at his side. "This is what you get," he said, "disrespecting your father like that." Tyrion turned to his uncle, a snarl to his face. "Look me in the eye, nuncle," he challenges, "and tell me that my words were wrong." "Wrong? Far from that," Kevin huffs. "That was stupid, what you did. The way you disrespected Tywin. And at such a vulnerable juncture." He shakes his head. "Now he is going to do his best to make your life miserable." A calculating gleam reflects off Tyrion's eyes. "Not if you were to unruffle some feathers." Kevin scoffs. "That's far-fetched." His eyes turn somewhere else. Besides, I have my own fires to deal with. Issues of your own, he jokes. And here I thought you to be nothing other than a living extension of father's will. It is Lancel, Kevin says, despondent. He'd befell a wound on his arm in the Battle of the Blackwater, one that wouldn't fester. When it seemed like Stannis would be able to breach the mud gate, Lancel was at the Red Keep, and has objected overmuch to Cersei's order to sequester Joffrey to Maegor's Holdfast. Good thinking. If the men saw their king fleeing with the women and children, he shakes his head. Anyhow, Cersei stupidly struck his wound, exasperating it, which the Maester says might be the reason for his infection. His wound does not heal, and he is weak and frail, unable to even feed himself. Kevin's eyes go sad. A son at the hand of Robb Stark, another behind a siege in Lannisport, and my oldest, sick because of the folly of his own cousin. Lancel acquitted himself admirably during the battle. He is young, and his body is full of vigor. Tyrion consoles. That boy is a survivor. Such is all our hope. Kevin answers. Your sister had her son name him the new Lord of Derry in the Riverlands. A castle that she does not own, that we cannot reach, as if that is enough to make us even. Not to belittle your situation, but it seems to me that there might be a way to showcase your disapproval without angering father. At Kevin's nonplussed look, Tyrion elaborates. While I cannot convince you to act against my father for my behalf, I believe it would be a simple matter to have you hinder any of my sister's schemes. With my father's anger, I'd wager she'll start to work against me in her own, rough way. Kevin thinks for a moment. Lancel does speak well of your actions in the Blackwater, and I suppose it is your wittiness that ensured our victory. He nods. I will help you. Tyrion nods, satisfied with the outcome, while Kevin is pulled away for his duties. Once it became socially acceptable for him to do so, Tyrion made to leave, only to be stopped by a large man. He was 7 feet tall, well-muscled, with broad shoulders and a narrow waist. The man had a strong jaw, blue eyes, and a thick red mustache, and wore a gilded half-helm and a green cloak edged in gold satin, with the golden rose of Highgarden sewn on his chest. Tyrion Lannister, he says. The Lady Olenna wishes to speak with you. Tyrion raises an eyebrow. The Queen of Thorns, he answers. I'd be glad to, but I do not see her here. Where is she? She felt uncomforted by the noise, and has sequestered herself to the gardens. The man promptly responds. If you will follow me. Tyrion glances at him for a while, before finally acquiescing. Very well. He was led by the large man to an isolated part of the gardens, where he found Olenna Tyrell, another young man who he knew to be her grandson Garland Tyrell, and another man, a complete replica of the one who led him to his destination. Good job escorting the imp, Eric. Or was it Eric? Ah, I do not care either way. The man simply bowed and stood next to his brother at the older woman's back, next to his brother. Lady Olenna was a small woman, the size of a child. The white-haired lady appeared wrinkled and wizened. She had soft, spotted hands with gaunt, thin fingers. She looked Tyrion in the eye. Forgive me, did your moniker offend you? In my old age I tend to forget my manners. She smelled of rosewater, but she also had an old woman's sour breath and toothless smiles. Sit, if you will, or climb, whatever stops you from hiding behind my table. Tyrion, speechless, unconsciously pulls himself up the chair opposite hers. It is no wonder you have no friends, grandmother. Garland to her right smiled at him. He looked much like his brother Loras, except taller, more broadly built, and with a beard. Do not mind her, Lord Tyrion. 'Tis but many of her wretched japes. Rumors, and what Tyrion suspects to be truth, is that Garland, the gallant, as they call him, is his younger brother's better version. Recently, he was especially famous for his actions during the Battle of the Blackwater, where he wore Renly's old armor. Lit up by the otherworldly light of wildfire, he led the Tyrell vanguard, seeming to Stannis, ignorant men-at-arms as Renly's ghost, and slayed his opposite number, Esser Gyred Morrigan, in single combat. Olenna huffs. The man is a dwarf, Garland, not a mute. She chides. He can defend himself. Finally, Tyrion finds his bearings. With so many large, intimidating men around. He smirks. I'm afraid I need all the help I need. Looking at that scar, I'd say there is more to your childlike frame than it seems. Olenna leans forward, an ornate cane at her hand supporting her weight. I also heard of that spat of yours, the one you had with your father. Tyrion's smile turns brittle. It is quite unfortunate, but our family isn't quite as homogeneous as yours. Ha, she laughs, holding on to her grandson's hand. Our family, homogeneous. Your spat, compared to my oaf of a son's childish tantrums, seem downright delightful. Grandmother, Garland hisses out. Oh, spare me the doddering, you know how your father is. To this day I still wonder about which one of his wet nurses dropped him as a child. She snarks. I thank the gods every day that his foolishness skipped a generation, although Loras still brings me doubt. I doubt your views will survive a meeting with my sister. Tyrion attempts to divert the subject. I did. Meet your sister, I mean. Olenna answers. Beautiful, unpleasant woman. I don't blame you for your feelings. If I had to spend even one day under the same roof with that crazy wretch, I'd have thrown myself off the ramparts. A lifetime of that. Tisk tisk, I do so pity you. Yes, we all hate Cersei. Tyrion steeple his fingers. But I tire myself of small talk however delightful it may be, and so I ask, why do you wish to speak with me? Olenna and Garland shared a discreet glance. Lord Tyrion, unlike you, I am terribly fond of my sister. Garland begins. And so it becomes my duty to be assured of her safety and well-being. That boy, Joffrey, Olenna interrupts. We want to know if the rumors are true. Olenna shrugs as her grandson glares at her. What? The man clearly said he is tired of small talk. I'd rather get done with it and let him leave. Tyrion sighs. What rumors do you speak of? He says. Is it the fact that he is an unfeeling monster who enjoys the suffering of others? Is it about his questionable sexual desires, whence he received 2 whores and sent one of them back with a bolt lodged in her chest? There are many rumors about my nephew, some bad, some good. He says. Let me be clear, if you were to hear any rumor about my nephew that includes even the slightest implication of misbehavior, then know that without a shadow of a doubt that they are more than likely true. My sister has spoiled that boy rotten, made him believe that he has the right to do whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted. Ned Stark was supposed to be banished to the Wall, ending this conflict in its infancy, but the dolt was the one responsible for his death. I see, Olenna answers. That is concerning. Of course, my father has knowledge of these matters themselves, so the brunt of the power has been taken away from Joffrey, and to truly hold influence, you need a seat at the table, the small councils, to be specific. He explains. Which seat were you promised in exchange of your support? It cannot be more than one, my father will not accept anything but. Olenna and Garland share a glance, but they stay silent. No answer. That is fine, I can speak enough for the 3 of us. Tyrion says. My father is hand of the king of course, so it cannot be that. Varys is master of whisperers, and his allegiance is practically unknown. Pycelle is grandmaster, and he's my father's creature through and through. That leaves master of laws, master of ships and master of coin. The master of laws chooses the commander of the city watch, so father will choose someone he trusts, Uncle Kevin perhaps, so that's not it. Master of coin is certainly possible, but I cannot see Mace Tyrell or even yourself accepting a position that has to do with counting coppers. The court certainly looks down on such activities anyway. He muses. That leaves master of ships, which could work, certainly. Neither the Crown nor the Westerlands have a particularly formidable fleet, and the Redwinds boast of the largest fleet in Westeros. It seems like the logical choice, seeing as you were born to their house. Tyrion smirks in victory. Olenna scoffs. So you have a measure of logical thought. Congratulations, you are above average. What do you want? A lemon tart for a hard-working boy? I am just painting a picture. He answers. You have managed to entrench yourself to the court by getting a queen, but your granddaughter, clever she may be, will not be able to gather you much influence, as a queen's power lays in her proximity to the king, and our king is not only deranged, but defanged. All you have now is a seat on the small council, while my father holds 3. It seems to me like you are outnumbered, and the only way to change this dynamic is simple. The last seat, the master of coin, needs to be held by someone favorable to your interests, or at least neutral to some degree. Ha, and you think you're the one, is that it? Tyrion nods. Indeed, you know of my situation, not only that, but you know of my father's temperament. To him, the thing you call a spat consists of something graver, a stain on his reputation, and Tywin Lannister values his reputation more than his life. Olenna waved her hand mindlessly. I have to admit, this is the first time someone used their desperation as a bargaining chip. You no longer hold your father's favor, and therefore are in dire need of backing. I get it. He smirks. You truly do deserve your reputation. Indeed, I need a way to keep me relevant, and my relationship with my father goes beyond strained. I have a reputation for being smart and bookish, things most people would consider right for the position, and I have a favorable reputation in King's Landing. I did hold the fort and keep everyone alive, after all. He explains. I imagine, if you were to put forth my name as a candidate, and with some maneuvering from my side, my father will have no choice but to accept. Why would Tywin Lannister refuse his own son's candidacy into the small council? Garland interjects. Especially if it was brought forth by his political enemies. Tyrion bows his head in agreement. Precisely, we just have to phrase it as a placating gesture from you, as you did force a lot of concessions out of my father, and a humiliating gesture for me. I was hand of the king, even if temporarily, and a demotion from such a position to the least appealing seat on the table will be considered an insult by many. Olenna stays silent, breathing heavily into her cane. She squints her eyes toward him, as if attempting to see through him, before finally letting out a sigh. The people have deemed you imp for the wrong reasons, it seems. She japes. Very well, I agree. Tyrion held the side of his chair tightly, resisting the urge to jump up and down in elation. To a fruitful friendship. 29 comments 0 vote. Chapter 45. 5 chapters further in all my stories here. Patreon.com/Niflheim. I know most people tend to prefer Robb POVs, but this and another chapter are the only ones with other perspectives before going fully into Robb's. I have a free week, so you'll probably get at least 5 chapters this week. Chapter 45. Theon Greyjoy. The ability to strategize is an extremely important condition to winning a war. To that end, naval warfare offers additional challenges in that regard. That issue becomes even more dire when it comes to fighting in enemy territory. A smart or cunning admiral would try to locate hidden coves or ridges, to gather his commanders in order to strategize and plan. But his uncle Victarion was different. He thought it better to waste lives and resources in order to claim Feastfires. Feastfires was a castle situated on the tip of the peninsula extending west off Lannisport and Castle Rock. It had a small port, enough for small cogs and longships, but its lands were neither fertile nor rich, and its small folk and lordly house had already escaped to Lannisport, leaving only a small garrison of boneheaded men who didn't care enough for their lives. Men who were well equipped, had enough food for months, and hid behind castle walls. The castle was also completely useless as a supply point because a better alternative already existed in Fair Isle. More than 100 men were lost in that endeavor, all for Victarion's abject pleasure to sit his ass on a hull instead of a ship, and no one dared to speak against him. Theon didn't either, he just didn't care enough to do so. He didn't even want to be here, he'd rather stay in Faircastle and handle things there, keep things simple and routine to coast through this war. But his sister and Dagmar disagreed. He was apparently too canny to be wasted somewhere like that. "You're a Greyjoy," they said, as if that explained anything. He couldn't help but feel somewhat amused at the prospect, though. The old him would have jumped at the chance to get that sort of recognition. His plan was behind the capture of a significant strategic resource, and he'd received credit from that fact. But in hindsight, his old self wouldn't even had the chance to come up with a plan, too engrossed in his own inferiority issues to think through his emotions. "Anything to add?" his sister asked him, breaking him out of his stupor. It was only now that he realized where he sat. At the edge of the castle's hall with his sister in tow. "About what?" he responds. His sister sighs. "Father has ordered Uncle Victarion to take Lannisport at all costs, but with the Lannister-Tyrell alliance, I think that would be a foolish decision." Theon thought about it for a moment, considering their situation. Frankly, he could see why his father came to that decision. Their attack on the Westerlands went better than expected. Not only were the Westerlands' numbers depleted from their loss to Robb, but their side was able to quickly secure portside positions like Fair Isle, and so their logistics are assured. They had the greater navy and the more skilled sailors. For all intents and purposes, as long as the Ironborn kept to the sea, they would win. But that is precisely the problem. The reason they had such an easy time until now is due to the Lannisters' knowledge of their weakness at sea. The moment they realized their situation, their planned strategy was to fortify and defend. The Northern Riverlander army, despite their overwhelming victory, left the Western Kingdom relatively intact. Half the Lannisport navy and a great deal of grain and gold was lost in negotiations, let alone the many more tributes and spoils gathered by their men. But apart from that initial battle, no more were held in this kingdom apart from the taking of the Golden Tooth. But the Westerlands are known as the richest in the Seven Kingdoms for a reason, and so their lords gathered the bulk of their riches, food, and fighting men in Lannisport, while the city's young, old, and frail, were sent to Castle Rock, where their safety was guaranteed. Whatever was left of their navy was bunched up tightly next to the city's shore. Those sent out to scout were small ships with an abundance of rowers, capable of keeping pace with their longships, and so cannot be snuck upon. The Ironborn cannot attack at land, because frankly, they suck at it, so their only choice is to simply wait them out. But, knowing that they have enough food to last more than a year, that is not feasible. I say we move on. Lannisport won't fall, not at our hands. Theon answers. We should move south at the coast, take any place with a port, Tarbeck Hall, Crake Hall with its lumber, Old Oak, even the Shield Islands. Take their men as thralls, take their lumbers back, and build more ships, recruit more men, increase the size of our fleet, then rinse and repeat. Slow and steady, is it? Asha muses. That could work, were we quick enough, our fleet would grow large enough to be uncontested, we'd run roughshod through the seas. She shakes her head. But father wants Lannisport, he thinks it should be as easy as last time, where Euron burned the whole Western fleet, and sadly, many agree. He thinks he needs it to cement his rule. Asha nods. That means we have a grueling battle on our hands. Asterisk. Theon stood at the prow of the longboat. He barely felt the cold spray on his face. Lannisport's walls glowed with fire. Flaming stones arced through the dark sky. He heard the screams of men but felt nothing. Everything seemed distant, as if in a dream. A fiery rock flew close, and Theon ducked automatically. The roar of impact shook the boat. One of his archers froze, mouth hanging open in terror. Theon slapped the man's shoulder without thinking. He didn't speak, only stared ahead. The waves tossed the boat onto the rocky shore. Theon staggered off, bow in hand. His feet sank into wet sand. The clang of steel and the crack of catapults blurred together. He saw fire in every direction, yet he felt oddly numb. Spotting a mound of rocks, Theon gestured for the archers to follow. They stumbled forward, bodies low, eyes wide. Huddling behind the stones, they waited for the next barrage. Theon's heart pounded, but he could hardly feel it. Everything was chaos, but in his mind, it was only silence. Theon led his archers up the rocky path, heading for a cliff outcrop. From there, they could rain arrows on the defenders below and hide behind the rocks when under fire. His mind felt dull and distant, but he kept moving. As they neared the outcrop, a group of Lannister guards emerged, swords drawn. Theon felt his heart tighten, but there was no time to think. A sudden clash followed, metal striking metal. One guard lunged at Theon, knocking him to the ground. The impact jolted him, yet he hardly felt the pain. They rolled over the dirt, each struggling to gain control. Theon tried to wrap his hands around the guard's throat, but the man fought wildly. Gasping, Theon fumbled for an arrow from his quiver. He gripped the arrowhead like a dagger and drove it into the guard's side. Blood spattered across Theon's fingers as the guard went limp, choking on his last breath. Theon stood up, laboring breaths escaping his lips. Grabbing his bow, he forces himself to notch an arrow and pull. The arrow lodges itself on another guard's skull before he could stab one of his archers, and as he managed to put some distance between himself and the enemy, he was able with the help of some skilled men to get rid of the rest. He wiped the blood of the side of his face, looking around to assess the situation. More men than the entire number of the dead enemies perished, but enough men survived to serve their purpose. Send the signal. Get ready to cover for our men. Theon orders. One of his archers lights an arrow on fire, and shoots it upward. The signal was what their side needed, as the remaining Ironborn men, those who managed to get to shore, at least swiftly charged toward the wall with a great roar. At their head, a large figure draped in heavy armor and a shield emblazoned with a golden kraken surged forward. Ready! Theon screams out, holding a hand up. The surrounding men swiftly move into positions, arrows ready and strings taut. They would bring their men enough reprieve in order to reach the walls. That was basically their whole plan. For all the Ironborn's tendency to look down on, cowardly, methods of war, they do allow, and sometimes encourage, the existence of archers quite easily. Their doctrine basically amounts to get as many men on a longship and get close enough to a ship to board it. The issue is that without any sort of covering fire, your men are more pincushions than humans by the time they reach the enemy, so a need for archers was created. So that's it, Victarion's strategy is simply to consider the city as a giant-ass ship, and use the exact same tactic writ large to storm it. So, moments before their vanguard reached the enemy's range, Theon opened their volley by shooting one of his own. Luckily, he hit a crossbowman on the neck, who swiftly fell down from the battlement, the crunching of his bones echoing all the way to their side. The others swiftly follow. Their barrage, coming from a favorable vantage point, forced the defenders to duck and hide. Separate into teams of twos. When the others knock, you shoot. Theon shouts. Do not let them breathe for a second. Their rhythm was awkward at first, but they slowly managed to keep a constant hail of arrows going. They didn't cause a lot casualties, but an enemy hiding from a fusillade is one that isn't throwing rocks at their climbers. Speaking of, their first reaver had already scaled the wall, only to get skewered by a pike. But as the first died, and the second and third made it too, more and more managed to climb, creating their own defensive position, and pushing back in order to let more follow. Finally, his own uncle had made it up. Most interestingly, one of Theon's randomly shot arrows had killed a man about to strike Victarion's neck as he pulled himself up, which meant the man owes him his life. His arrival emboldened the men, as they amassed themselves on one block and charged together toward the enemies. They were met with a wall of pikes. Behind those men were heavily armored men, knights with a well-built man with a lion's mane at their head. Thank the drowned god Asha isn't here. His sister's role, while important, wasn't as dangerous as their current situation. Asha led a large number of ships against the enemy navy, quite successfully in fact, and had created the necessary opening for their men to go through the blockade and attempt their offensive action. Your Grace, one of the archers exclaimed, fear in his voice. Theon turned to the man, who he himself looked to the side with horror. Following his gaze, Theon sees a large scorpion turning toward them just as it shot its bolt. The bolt struck the side of their rocky position. Most unfortunately, that itself forced the boulder holding up the ground under their feet to shatter. Before he could even act, Theon fell roughly as he was pushed by one of the man-rolling rocks. He felt immense pain well up his spine, as he skid violently against the jutting rocks. Consciousness left him fast, and the last thing he was able to glimpse is the sight of the Lannister man losing an ear to his uncle, only to take Victarion's leg.